Boyd continued down the alleyway until he found himself standing beside the gate marked with Charlotte's house number, 37. He panned the torch down at the ground, not sure what he was hoping to find. The ground was a mush of rotting fallen leaves, escaped rubbish, and cat shit on a bed of old cobblestones. And yes, there were footprints, plenty of them, most likely from the bin men or her neighbours, wheeling their bins out or in on collection day. He aimed the torch back up onto the gate and her fence. There was a hole in the fence, a wood knot that had either fallen out or been pushed out. He stepped closer and peered through the hole to see her small backyard. More than that, there was a clear view into her kitchen and the door to the hallway. He could even see a sliver of the front door and its stained glass. He scrunched down and peered upwards. He could see her bathroom and her spare bedroom. A peeping Tom using this little knothole in the fence had a pretty good view to the front downstairs, and would also have a tantalizing glimpse upstairs. A peeping Tom, then? A potential burglar? Or worse? He decided he'd get her ex-husband's full name from Charlotte and take a look on Leads first thing Monday morning. Chapter 34. Boyd surreptitiously watched Charlotte as she threw the tennis ball for both dogs down the shingle beach towards the retreating surf. Mia pursued it only ankle-deep into the freezing cold water, while Ozzy plunged the rest of the way in rather than let the sea, his evil roaring nemesis, claim the prize. "You know, I'm not doubting you saw someone," Boyd said. Charlotte smiled. "The poor young lady has simply lost her mind," she pronounced in the style of Maggie Smith. "But—" She looked at him. "There it is. The but." "But? There's nothing to verify it was your ex out there. I mean, you know there's a handy spy hole in the fence at the end?" She looked at him. Apparently she hadn't known. "Charlotte, you can see into the kitchen, up the hall to the front door, and up into the bathroom." Her eyes rounded. "Thank God that window's frosted glass." "Well, that's something, and I'm not sure this is something you want to hear, but it could simply be that you have a neighbourhood perv." She raised her brows at the simply. "Sorry, that came out sounding flippant. What I'm saying is this. Stalkers tend to want to let their victims know that they're being stalked. That's half the buzz for them. The fear they can inflict, the sense of control." Ozzy deposited the ball back at his feet, slimy and wet. Boyd tossed it back down the beach and continued. "You haven't received any anonymous texts? Had any letters or notes posted through your door?" She shook her head. "And nothing at work?" She shook her head again. "The thing is, Bill, Ewan isn't your average stalker, if there's such a thing. There was something," she paused, "almost destroying his mind from the inside. Maybe from his past, I don't know." "You can't excuse what he did like that," replied Boyd. "He was sick," Charlotte said, "collapsing mentally. At first, when I started to go out to work, I was worried I'd come home to find he'd done himself in. Then as things got worse, I started worrying he'd want to take me down with him. So that's when I left him," she sighed. We separated. I wish I could say that one day I'd had enough and told him to his face I was leaving, but I didn't. One day I went to work and just didn't go home." Boyd said, placing his hand on her back, "Where did you go?" "I went to stay with a female colleague. I couldn't stay with my parents or my grandparents, and it was lucky that I didn't. Ewan went round to their homes looking for me. My friend helped me to hide from him. It was—" Her voice faltered. "Terrifying. I really thought he was going to end us both." She waved a hand at Boyd to indicate that she'd talked enough. "Change of subject, please." She cleared her throat. Let me just say thank you, she said, firmly recomposing her face, but unable to hide the tremor in her voice. Thank you for putting me up, and, she added with a smile, for putting up with me. Hey, that's okay, he replied. I've got more rooms than I can use. It's just me and Em's rattling around in there. Speaking of Emma, she retrieved the ball from Mia's wet muzzle. You're going to need to talk to her about the other night. Ozzy let off a volley of barks, and she tossed the ball back down the beach. He'd given Charlotte a detail-light version of what he'd walked in on last night when she'd asked where Emma was. She's still avoiding me, he grumbled. She won't answer my texts, my calls. She's probably embarrassed, Bill, and angry with you. You walked in on a private situation. He ground his teeth and his jaw flexed. She might have been going along with that bastard, but not willingly. You don't know for sure what was going on, Charlotte replied. But you do need to find out. I'm bloody well trying to, he groused. Or perhaps someone else needs to talk to her? He looked at Charlotte hopefully, and she nodded. I'm happy to, Bill. It might be better with me, you know, with someone who's not too close, and perhaps with someone who's female. He nodded. Christ, would you? Of course. He squeezed her shoulder lightly. Thank you, Charlotte. That's really good of you. Just paying my rent, she replied. You do know you can stay as long as you like, he told her. Thank you. Another night would be good if that's okay, she said. But I don't want to be intimidated into keeping away from my home. It's my space, my home, my sanctum sanctorum. It might not be much, but it's mine. She took another deep breath. And I'm not giving it all up, simply because of some peeping Tom. I've earned my home. Chapter 35. Boyd shoved a pot of oats so simple into the kitchenette's microwave and slapped it on. He and Charlotte had polished off 2 bottles of Malbec through Sunday afternoon and into the evening, and both had emerged from their respective bedrooms this morning late and with sore heads. Charlotte had decided to take a flexi day, since Mondays were slow at the theatre anyway. She said she'd walk the dogs, and promised Boyd she'd try to have a chat with Emma when she came back from her night shift. Hey-ho, boss, and how are you this mighty fine morning? Boyd turned to see Minter in the doorway, looking very pleased with himself. I take it your Iron Man challenge was an epic win, he said. I was well into the bottom half of the entries, to be honest, he replied. Not so good. I was hoping to do much better. He grinned. Didn't need my recovery day after all, though. Why are you looking so bloody chirpy, then? Boyd asked. The detective sergeant did look ridiculously pleased with himself, puzzlingly so. Well, boss, a funny old thing happened to me just after I crossed the finishing line. You collapsed? You needed a paramedic? You had an out-of-body experience, Boyd said. Minter stroked his immaculately clipped beard. No, boss, but I was approached by a modelling talent scout. The microwave pinged beside Boyd. You what? The what? A talent scout from one of those modelling agencies stopped me and gave me a business card. Minter absently straightened his back, pushed out his pecs, and ran a hand through his glossy dark hair. Boyd pulled his pot of oats out of the microwave. You might want to be careful, Minter, he said with a straight face. Did she say what kind of modelling? Well, not exactly, no. But she said I had just the right look for their agency. She said they pay their models a fortune. She said they're after the athletic type. That's why she was lingering around the finish line. Minter pulled a business card out of his waistcoat pocket and held it out. Boyd took it and looked at the card. Hard Men. The name was in a bold burgundy font, set against a dark green background. Very masculine, with a hint of online casino about it. You might want to give them a call before you think of a career change, he said, pulling a face. I mean, it looks a bit, Hard Men. Minter read the name aloud. As in masculine fellas, totally ripped blokes, so to speak. No, I get that, but what? Boyd grinned and gently slapped his shoulder. Nothing, Mincy, my man. I'm sure you'll be great. He took the piping hot bowl of oats back to his desk, sat down and logged himself into LEDs. There was work to be done. Following his trip up to interview Harris, of course, but top of his list was the name he had written down on a slip of paper. Ewan Lester Jones. Not officially police business just yet, but it might well become police business if Charlotte Stalker did turn out to be him. He tapped the name in. He'd also managed to get a date of birth out of Charlotte, which meant she'd guessed he was going to do a little unofficial digging, even though she hadn't asked him to. Ewan Lester Jones. Date of birth, 14th of the 2nd, 1960. Bingo. Ewan Jones had a criminal record. Boyd was about to open it when the LED's help system interceded and splashed a message box across the whole screen. Essential database section maintenance in progress. We apologize for any inconvenience. His head flopped back and he found himself gazing in frustration at the polystyrene ceiling tiles. Oh, for Christ. He ate his porridge and tried his luck again, but to no avail. The perky, apologetic message popped up once more. Okay, fine. There was, of course, always Google. He tapped Jones's name into the search bar, along with artist, and got back a cluttered page of results. There were a couple of pictures of a willowy young man with wavy hair, standing proudly before a painting in a gallery, beside a tweedy-dressed older man who had an arm around his shoulders. It could have been his father or his agent. Boyd clicked through to one of Ewan Jones's paintings. He had no idea what the fine art terminology would be for the man's painting style, but to his eyes it looked loose and energetic. He could see broad brushstrokes that could have been applied with a paint roller. Then in other places, the tiniest of details that had been applied with care and a fine tip. The next image pulled a breath out of him. It was Charlotte, unmistakably her. Younger, of course, younger even than she would have been at the time, he guessed. The portrait made her look as though she was 12 or thereabouts. Jones's style was the same. Careless splashes of paint for the background, broad, confident strokes for her body, but the finest attention reserved for her face, particularly around her hazel-coloured eyes. He had her likeness nailed in those eyes. There was something about the portrait that set it apart from chocolate box art. The colours were muted, like a Polaroid left too long on a windowsill. The background was dark. Clutched in one of her pale hands was a piece of scarlet material. A handkerchief, maybe? And that was the only bold splash of colour in the entire composition. He clicked back to LEDs. Miraculously, it was up and running once more. He typed in Jones's details again, and the man's criminal record popped up. The face in the top right corner of the screen was that of a man in his late 40s. The photo taken back in 2005. He still had a full head of wavy hair that had largely gone grey and was sporting a scruffy salt and pepper beard with some flecks of auburn still hanging on in there. Boyd looked at the docket. He'd been arrested and interviewed over an allegation of a violent assault on his wife, Charlotte K. Jones. Boyd scanned the interview transcription. Jones's contributions were all no comment, but the interviewing officer's questions filled in most of the details. The allegation was that he'd followed Charlotte to work one morning and had spotted her getting a coffee with a male work colleague. That night, when she'd come home, he'd confronted her about it, accusing her of having an affair. Then he'd punched her in the face. There was a photo attached that made Boyd wince. Charlotte. In this picture, she was nearly 20 years younger, but somehow looked older, drawn and haggard. One eye was slightly puffed up and discoloured. The case appeared to have not been taken any further, and Boyd spotted a tacked-on note that Charlotte had refused to press charges. He involuntarily slumped back into his seat. He could imagine an all-too-familiar scene playing out across a kitchen table. A tearful Jones pleading with her that he'd never hurt her again, that he loved her beyond words, and he had no idea what had come over him. And Charlotte nodding, perhaps forgiving, certainly hoping she could believe him. Boyd scrolled down to the next entry, and his heart stopped. From the look of things, Charlotte had had a very, very lucky escape. Gav? Okaki was standing in front of his desk. Boyd looked up from his screen. Yep. We've had some results back from Ellisy on the DNA swabs. It took him a moment to switch gears back to the Martello Tower case. DNA swabs? From the lunchbox? The apple core? The wrappers? The Pez dispenser? Oh, right. He checked his watch. It was 10:20. The last hour and a half had shot past him. He'd meant to call the team together for an update before lunch, but had allowed himself to get sidetracked. Let's grab the small conference room and rally the troops then, he said. Okaki nodded. In 10? You going up for a coffee? She nodded again. Do you want the usual? Chapter 36. Boyd returned from visiting Sutherland's Goldfish Bowl to find the four of them assembled in the small conference room and deeply involved in a discussion about Minter's potential career change. O'Neill nearly wet himself when I told him, Warren was saying. Said you were probably going to end up in a porno. Yeah, well, Minter tried not to look irritated. He's just jealous. So what aesthetic was it that they were trying to evaluate you on? Asked Sully. The ability to adopt an upright walking posture, opposable thumbs. Was it the monobrow? Okaki chuckled. Or the permanently crazed knuckles? Minter slow clapped. Bravo! Hilarious stuff, guys. Bloody hilarious. I'm pissing myself here. I am. I read somewhere there's an agency that hires out stunt torsos, continued Okaki. You know, for those close-up shots of Mark Wahlberg or Tom Hardy. Or Putin, added Sully. You could end up being Vladimir Putin's stunt belly. Boyd sat down at the table. All right, kids, that's enough. Leave our poor supermodel alone, please. The D-Sup's joining us in a second. Does Sutherland know? Asked Okaki hopefully. If O'Neill knows, said Warren, I'd say everyone in CID knows by now. Sutherland appeared outside the glass door, summoned like a genie by the mention of his name. He stepped in. Good morning, everyone. Morning, sir, they chorused. He grabbed the spare seat, sat down with them and looked expectantly at Boyd. Right, Boyd began. First things first. We've got some DNA results back from Ellisy. Okaki, what's the news? She looked down at the email she'd printed out. They got 2 distinct DNA profiles off the apple core. Apple core? Repeated Sutherland incredulously. An apple core survived 50 years? Okaki nodded. Uh-huh. It was in a totally dry, sterile environment. The lunchbox was completely sealed, and excuse the pun, bone dry on the inside. The apple core looked like an old conker. She glanced back at the email. So, 2 distinct profiles. Profile Alpha has no matches or familial matches on the NDNAD. But Profile Beta gave us a hit. She gave Boyd a broad, congratulatory smile. It's our man, Ricky Harris. Warren let out a gasp and punched the air. I knew it! I knew it! Sutherland ran a hand across the smooth skin under his chin. That's a relief. So it was money well spent then, he said, as if the trip up north had been something he'd championed all along. Is that going to be enough to charge him and bring him down here? Asked Warren. I doubt it, said Minter. CPS will want more than that. We've got forensics that put him with the girl, said Okaki. He's got form. We've got suspicious behaviour, buying the tower and hanging on to it for so long. And then there's all that awful music in the videos, those sick album covers. Unfortunately, the law doesn't allow us to convict a man for poor taste, said Sully. If it did, then half of CID would be in jail. Nor for making a poor property purchase, added Boyd. Plus, there are 2 DNA profiles. I presume they've ruled out Patricia Hemsworth as the other. Okaki nodded. If we can't identify the other one, or we do, and the other profile belongs to someone who's now deceased, then Harris's defence becomes as simple as the other guy did it, said Boyd. What about joint enterprise? Asked Sully. Sutherland shook his head. CPS don't like using that so much these days. It's acquiring a bit of a reputation for bouncing at trial. We'll definitely need more before we can make an arrest, said Boyd. Otherwise, all we're doing is warning him. And I suspect he'd do a good job of going to ground somewhere else. We've got the 2 complete bodies that were stuffed in the tower's wall going on the slab this afternoon, said Okaki. She checked her watch. In a couple of hours' time, actually. Can you sit in on those? Asked Boyd. Yep, I'm already on it, she replied. I can go too, said Sully, if you want. Boyd shook his head. I want you back at the tower. Who's there now, by the way? Leslie Poole and a couple of uniforms, answered Sully. They're pumping water again. Good, Boyd nodded thoughtfully. Poole handled Knight pretty well. Read him the riot act and kicked him out of the tower, he said with a smile. I like her a lot. He looked at Sully. We're expecting at least one more body down there with that arm bone. It's going to happen sooner or later. How close are we to the bottom? We're nearly there, said Okaki. Another couple of days by the sound of it. Okay, so best that you're at hand, Sully, in case something else gets sucked up or revealed. Sully shrugged. Okay. If we get lucky on one of those 2 bodies, and by that I mean Harris's DNA is on them, then we can issue an arrest warrant to get him parcelled up and sent down here. Boyd looked at Sutherland. Joint enterprise on Patricia Hemsworth would probably stand a chance then. Not bad for the money spent, eh, sir? Sutherland nodded. Indeed, happy days. Warren? Sir? I've been thinking about the symbols that were carved on the bricks pulled out from the wall. Do some digging on the album covers for Harris's band. I'm pretty sure I saw some similar swirly symbols in his grotto. Yes, sir. Harris was super keen to mention he was the creative driving force of the band. Maybe there's a link, motif, or theme running through their stuff that can add weight to our next interview with him. Warren nodded. Minter? Yes, boss? I need to update the action log with you. And then, I'm afraid, once Okaki has the initial results on the 2 bodies, we're probably going to have to start trawling Mispers to see if we can ID them. Would you like me to go and grab O'Neill? Minter asked. Flax roped O'Neill into operations, Rosper, cut in Sutherland. He made a request to have him swapped into his team. Swapped? Who's been tossed out? Boyd asked. D.C. Lawrence. Boyd knew nothing about him. Personality clash, added Sutherland. What, is this Lawrence a pain in the arse then? Sutherland made a non-committal shrug. All right, well, let's not have him here. Boyd looked across the table at Minter. In that case, I guess it's just you and me hitting the Mispers. You stud muffin, you. Chapter 37. While he was waiting for news from Okaki and Ellisy, Boyd took the opportunity to have a look at the rest of Jones's criminal record. In 2008, Ewan Jones had been charged with violent assault and the abduction of a woman in Canterbury, Kent. He'd been working as a security guard at the time. According to the file, he'd used his uniform and ID lanyard to convince a woman walking home at night that he was a policeman. The woman had realized at the last moment that something was wrong, but it had been too late. She'd been overpowered and bundled into the back of his van. Jones had driven her across Kent and into East Sussex. The woman, however, had managed to escape him when his van had careered off the road and into a ditch. Apparently, Jones had been over the legal limit, but he'd also had significant traces of synthetic cannabinoids, spice, in his blood at the time. The woman had fled and managed to flag down a car, and the police had been called. There had been no big dramatic manhunt. The arresting officer had found Jones sitting beneath a road sign out in the Romney Marshes, about 100 yards away from his totaled van. The officer had said that he almost seemed relieved to have some company out there. What made for chilling reading, though, was the fact that in the back of his van was what was essentially a murder kit: duct tape, plastic bin bags, and a kitchen knife. It was clear that he'd intended to kill her, then dispose of the body. Boyd dug his earbuds out of his bag, put them in, and clicked on the first of several interview videos, made just hours after Jones's arrest. The camera was the usual corner-mounted one with a wide field of view that encompassed the small room. Jones was sat in the corner, and there were two detectives on bucket chairs almost boxing him in. Jones looked tidier, his wavy hair now a closely clipped silver sheen. His scruffy beard was a tidy little white goatee. He'd put on some weight, too, a far cry from the willowy young art prodigy with a golden future ahead of him. OK, recording on. The time is 3:15 a.m. The date is September the 5th, 2008. Interviewee is Ewan Lester Jones. Interviewing officers are Detective Inspector Sutherland, Sussex CID, and Detective Sergeant Ross, Kent CID. Boyd leant in closer. He thought he'd recognised that perfectly round head of Sutherland's. Now then, Ewan, started Sutherland. You were arrested for violent assault and abduction. I'm going to repeat the caution for the video record. You do not have to... Boyd scrubbed the video forward 20 seconds. So, why don't you explain to us what happened? Why did you grab this woman? What was your intention? It was the kind of question guaranteed to draw out a no comment. But it looked as though Jones, still wearing his security guard uniform, was keen to engage. I had to, he replied. I really had to do something. Jones's accent was neutral. Boyd had been half expecting a slightly more earthy accent, something a bit geezer. But instead, he had plummy vowels, and the all-present and correct consonants of a Radio 4 theatre critic. Do what exactly? Pressed Sutherland. I had to take care of the matter once and for all, replied Jones. She was getting angry with me. Getting really angry. Who was? The woman you abducted? No. Lottie. My Lottie. Who's Lottie? Jones chuckled, then muttered and shook his head. He seemed to be engaging with someone else in the room. Ewan, prompted the other copper, Ross. Who is Lottie? It took Boyd a moment to twig. Lottie? He's talking about Charlotte, isn't he? I really let her down, said Jones. I really... He started to sob. Ewan, said Sutherland. Tell me some more about Lottie. Come on. Ross handed Jones some water in a plastic cup. He accepted it gratefully, took several sips, and tried to compose himself again. I promised her, he said softly. I promised her I'd do better. Lottie? Prompted Sutherland. Jones nodded. She deserved much better. Who's Lottie? Asked Sutherland. A friend? A girlfriend? Jones looked up from his lap. My angel. My guardian angel. She's done so much for me and I treated her so badly. He began to sob again. What did you intend to do with the woman you abducted earlier? She looked so much like her. So much like her. I had to... Like Charlotte. Boyd paused the video, then scrolled down through the record until he came across a picture of Jones's victim. There were bruises and scrapes on her face. She'd been beaten, presumably as Jones attempted to wrestle control of her. Scabs and bruises aside, the likeness was unmistakably there. She bore a strong resemblance to Charlotte. It made the hairs on the back of his neck stir. Jesus. Ewan Jones had found himself a look-alike. Because he couldn't find his Charlotte, he'd been trawling for a surrogate. Boyd returned to the interview video and hit play. Sutherland looked down at a page of notes. So it says here you're married to but estranged from a woman called Charlotte Jones? Jones nodded. Is that who we're talking about, Ewan? Charlotte, your wife? She was so beautiful, he whimpered. So beautiful. I can't believe what we did to her. What did you do to her? Boyd paused the video and scrubbed it back. Can't believe what we did to her. We? It sounded a lot like he'd said we. But then it could have been he. He played the video again, hoping that the younger D.I. Sutherland had picked up on it. But he hadn't. What happened to Charlotte? Sutherland was focusing there. What did you do to Lottie? Ewan Jones had his head in his hands and was sobbing. I wanted to say sorry, he wailed. I wanted to make it all right. There was a beep, and the two detectives turned to look over their shoulder. Sutherland sighed and wilted. For the record, it's 3:19 a.m. The duty solicitor has entered the room. You are? Sebastian Graves. Has Mr. Jones been cautioned? Yes, of course, replied Sutherland irritably. A young man in a dark suit stepped into view, steered himself past the detectives and sat down next to Jones. I'd like this interview to be terminated until I've had a chance to talk to my client. Sutherland leant in towards the recorder. It's 3:20 a.m. The interview has been suspended. The screen went black. Staying seated, Minter wheeled his chair over to Boyd's desk and parked himself at the corner. Boss, I had a quick chat with Okaki to get the basics about an hour ago. I got some missed purrs that look promising. Are you okay to review them now? Boyd closed the tab on Ewan Jones and looked at the printouts that Minter had placed on the corner of his desk. Yeah, go for it. So first up, we've got Laura Khan, aged 23, reported missing in 2003. She was living in Hounslow at the time. Boyd picked up the top printout and found himself looking at the photograph of a smiling, young, dark-haired woman. What made you pull her up? He asked. Her mother said she had an interest in haunted houses, urban legends, visiting ruins. She was part of a forum called Undercover Explorers. People who go breaking into old abandoned buildings to take spooky photos or ghost reading measurements, Minter shrugged. Scooby-Doo types. Right. Boyd looked at Laura's picture. She had a vaguely familiar look to her. Something about her eyes. Her mother said that Laura used to arrange trips online with other forum members, and she didn't like it. Because, well, they were strangers that Laura was going to meet in person in remote locations. That's any mother's nightmare, right, boss? Boyd nodded. Can we get access to the forum? Is it still running? Minter shook his head. It's a 404. That page is missing, boss, he added, seeing Boyd's confused look. Right. And what about identifying features? Nothing useful. No birthmarks, tattoos, scars. Okay. That's not enough for a positive ID. So, who else have you got? Minter passed him another printout. Chloe Hunter, age 19, reported missing 1999. She was more local, from Romney in Kent. Boyd looked at the photo. Another smiling face. He hated that. The pictures that heartbroken mums handed over always seemed to be ones like this. A freeze-framed moment of happiness that would inevitably be compared to a discoloured face on a slab. Chloe had thick makeup on and purple hair, a look that used to be called goth, but was now, at least the last time he checked, emo. Her parents said that she'd broken her left leg a few weeks before she went missing, said Minter. That would show up as recently knitted bone, he added, if she's one of our bodies. Boyd jotted it down to remind him to mention to Okaki when they were done. Boss, said Minter, there's something else. He flicked through some of the other printouts he'd brought over. Yeah. The investigating officer took photos of some of the things in Chloe's room. Her diaries, journals, a pinboard. Take a look at this. He handed over a photograph of a corkboard. It was cluttered with all the things Boyd expected to see. Photo booth strips of her with a girlfriend pulling daft faces. Concert ticket stubs. Essay assignments, reminders, postcards, some dried flowers, drawings and doodles. Shit, muttered Boyd, as he stared at a scribbled image pinned to Chloe's board. He looked up at Minter. Why the hell didn't you give me this one first? Chapter 38. Okaki watched as Dr. Palmer made a slow and steady toe-to-head visual assessment of both bodies laid out on the two examination tables. She had placed a post-it note on each table. The nearest to Okaki had Jane Doe scrawled on it. The furthest away, Judy Doe. Jane looks fresher by a few years, said Dr. Palmer. Okaki nodded. We found her further up the tower stairs, so we're presuming she's the more recent of the two. Palmer checked her notes on an iPad. Ah, yes. And she came in last week, Okaki said, pointedly, before your Christmas party. Palmer looked up from her tablet, noting Okaki's tone. It was our annual conference. Okaki answered that with a sceptical bounce of her brows. Right. And both these bodies have been underwater for practically the whole time? We presume so. We're running with the assumption that the killer tucked them into holes in the wall that were just above the surface of the rising water. Places he knew would be submerged relatively soon. Palmer nodded. And they weren't sealed up in any way? Not like Patricia Hemsworth, no. The first one was wrapped in a bin liner, but it was torn, so completely waterlogged. The second one, Okaki glanced at Jane, was just jammed into the hole. She shrugged. Our man was obviously getting lazy. Dr. Palmer bent down to look more closely at Jane's head. The eyes are gone, just like the girl in the bag, she said. Patricia Hemsworth, Okaki noted. But also I see the tip of the nose and lips have gone. Is it possible rodents got to them? That's what I'm thinking. I can see gnawing striations on the nasal cartilage, and the flesh here, along the philtrum, has the same marks. Palmer peered more closely at the empty eye sockets. But if you look very carefully, you can see uniformly spaced striation, which suggests to me a serrated blade, offered Okaki. Palmer nodded. The eyes were popped out with a knife. She checked her iPad again, which, by the way, I also noted on Hemsworth. So the same killer then, said Okaki. Palmer looked up. Not necessarily. Same knife, though, or rather the same kind of knife. Okaki flipped a page on a notebook, pen at the ready. What kind? There's a thicker groove here, which suggests the handle end of the blade grinding along the orbital ridge, making it a very small blade. The kind you'd fold out from a penknife, I'd say. Okaki jotted that down. Could we match those striations to a make of knife? Palmer nodded. If you can provide me with a range, I can see if we get a match on one. Okaki's phone buzzed in her jacket pocket. She fished it out. Is that your squeamish DCI? Asked the pathologist. She was smiling. Okaki grinned and answered. Gav? Okaki, I've got a quick question for you. Go on. Can you ask if either of our cubbyhole bodies show signs of a recently knitted broken leg? Any particular leg? She asked. Left. Lower leg, shin bone, whatever that's called. Tibia, said Okaki. Right, well done, Boyd said. You win a lollipop. Okaki lowered her phone. Dr. Palmer, Have you done the x-rays on these bodies yet? Palmer nodded. First thing this morning. DCI Boyd wants to know if either girl showed signs of having a recently healed broken left tibia. Palmer picked up her iPad and swiped through several pages of details. Let's see. Okaki put the phone back to her ear. She's just looking that up. Why, do we have a decent Miss Per candidate? We may do, said Boyd. If there's signs of a mended shin, then almost certainly. Did I hear her say they'd already x-rayed? Yeah, she's checking through her slides now. Palmer looked up from her tablet, then turned to point at the other body behind her. Judy Doe, she said. Left tibia, you said? Okaki nodded. Palmer made a thumbs-up sign. There's a clear indicator of a healing callus along her left tibia, and enough of a bump present to indicate it was a recent break. Did you hear that? Said Okaki. Yes, Boyd exclaimed, and hung up. You're welcome, Okaki muttered to herself. Chapter 39. Just wander in, Boyd, why don't you? Boyd sighed and paused just inside Sutherland's office with a folder under one arm. He reached back and rapped his knuckles on the wide-open door. Sutherland sighed. Take a seat. Boyd sat. Could you shut the door first, please? Boyd got up, shoved the door closed and sat back down. So I think we've got enough now to issue an arrest warrant for Harris and have him brought down. Sutherland's eyes bloomed behind his penfold glasses. That was quick. What have you got? Boyd talked through the sequence of evidence. One of the bodies had been identified as Chloe Hunter. A familial DNA swab would confirm that. Chloe had been a heavy metal fan, and Dark Harvest was one of her favourite bands. Boyd showed him the picture of the corkboard in her bedroom, and pointed at a symbol that was a musical note upside down with two crossbars near the bottom. That's a symbol used on several of the band's album covers. What does it mean? Nothing, really. Warren's done some research. It's just a pretentious squiggle that Harris came up with. He pulled out a printed image from the folder he'd brought with him and set it down on Sutherland's desk. This is one of the bricks that was pulled out from beside Chloe Hunter. The same design had been etched into the brick's side, along with several others. Sutherland stroked the tip of his nose. That's helpful of him. Moronic, if Harris is our man. It's as good as carving Ricky was here. Boyd cracked a tilted smile. Obviously, the Muppet thought the water was never going to go back down again. Well, it's certainly interesting, if that symbol's unique, if it's Harris's design. Warren did an image search. He couldn't find it anywhere, other than links that tie with the band. It could have been cut by a fan, said Sutherland. That's possible, Boyd conceded. But we've also got Harris's DNA sitting alongside Hemsworth, the girl in the hold hall. Sutherland nodded. Do you have a theory that ties Hemsworth with the other victims? Boyd sat back. Harris killed a child when he was just a young teenager, possibly with the assistance of another person. That's the unidentified DNA I'm referring to. Harris buried her in the tower's basement. Later, when he becomes successful and makes his money, he buys the tower to make sure that no one can knock it down or do it up. But he also realises, having done that, it's a bloody good place to carry on dumping bodies. You're saying you think this old rocker is a serial killer? Boyd shrugged. We've got two very plausible Miss Purrs that fit timeline-wise with Harris owning the tower. Plus, the MO also links all three. Which is? Their eyes were plucked out. Christ, Sutherland huffed. I reckon we've got enough here to make a CPS-sanctioned case. And we might be able to get him to give us something on the other DNA in the lunchbox. A childhood mate, a school friend. Sutherland sat quietly for a moment, looking at the pictures in his hands. Finally he nodded. All right, then. That passes over my red line, he smiled. Good work, Boyd. I'll get on to the Scottish police to arrange the warrant and they can pick them up. Excellent, sir, thanks. He went to get up, then hesitated. "Oh, there's something else if you got a moment." Sutherland was still smiling, which Boyd took as a yes. "There was a case you were SIO on, going back a few years." "How many years?" "In 2008. Sutherland's eyes rolled up to look at the ceiling. "That's going back a bit." "You and Lester Jones, do you remember that one?" Sutherland scowled. "I vaguely recall the name." "He abducted a woman from Kent, drove her into Sussex and was almost certainly taking her somewhere to kill her and dispose of her. But he ran his van off the road into a ditch. She got away." The detective superintendent suddenly nodded. "Oh, blimey, yes, I remember that. He was a bloody strange character. What do you want to know?" "What was your take on him?" "Complete nutter, if I recall correctly," Sutherland replied. "I think he was a sculptor or something." "An artist." "Oh, that's right, yes. I remember those god-awful weird paintings of his." Sutherland's forehead rumpled with effort as he cast his mind back. "Depressing paintings of the same depressing person again and again, I believe." "Did he say what drove him to abduct that woman? What his intentions were?" Boyd asked. Sutherland frowned as he fumbled through his old career memories. "Nothing coherent that I can recall. I mean, he was under the influence of drugs at the time he was arrested. And then later, when he'd sobered up, it was all no comment. If I remember rightly, the defence tried to get him a softer sentence on the grounds of diminished responsibility, but the judge wasn't having any of that, and I quite agree." "You don't think he was mentally incapable?" "Mad? No. I think he was a sexual predator that we got lucky with and caught before he could rape and kill that poor woman." "But do you know why he went after that particular woman?" Boyd pressed. Sutherland shook his head. "Sorry, I honestly can't remember the case in great detail. It was quite a while back. Look, Boyd, what's this about? Is it linked to the Martello Tower?" Boyd shook his head. "No, it's not related. It's just—" "What?" "Somebody I know. She actually used to be married to him." "Good grief." "Yep. It's a small world." "Someone you know?" asked Sutherland pointedly. "A friend, or—" "Just a friend." Boyd felt uncomfortable asking what he wanted to ask. It was a bending of the rules, but still. "I want to interview you and Jones." "Why?" "I need to know what was going on with him when he abducted that woman. Maybe he'll be a little more talkative now that he's done his time." "Why the interest?" asked Sutherland, "if it's nothing to do with the Martello Tower." "I need to know if Jones is still fixating on his ex-wife, my friend Charlotte." He explained about her past with Jones and the concern she had that someone had been loitering outside her back garden. Sutherland narrowed his eyes. "Jones would have been psychologically evaluated before he was given parole. If he's out on license, it's because he's been deemed a no-risk and behaved himself inside." "But if he's stalking her—" "And do you know that he is?" asked Sutherland. "Does Charlotte wish to report him? Does she have any evidence? Letters, texts, phone calls, social media posts? Has he made any vocal threats?" Boyd didn't answer. He had nothing to back up his suspicions. "That's an uphill struggle, Boyd, without any evidence. If there's no justifiable reason for you to bring him in for interview, and then he makes a harassment complaint." Sutherland sat forward. "Add to that the personal connection. It's got to look very much like you were looking to settle an old score." Sutherland shook his head. Boyd nodded. "Right. If she has concerns, she needs to ring 999 and report it. If she has evidence, by all means, bring it to me. If she's scared, maybe she could stay with a friend for a while. But please, Boyd, don't go and do something you might regret." Sutherland checked his watch again. "I'd better get a wriggle on with this warrant, if you want Harris down here." Chapter 40. Charlotte heard Emma's bedroom door open and her light footsteps coming down the stairs and along the hall. She got up off the sofa and followed her into the kitchen. "Hello, Emma." Emma almost jumped out of her skin. "Oh, shit! I thought you were at work." She let out a gasp as she put the kettle on. "You made me jump." Fancy a brew? Oh, yes, tea, please, Charlotte said with a smile. No probs. Charlotte watched her as she bustled around the small kitchen. Are you working at the hotel this afternoon? Uh-huh, she replied. My shift starts at 4. She pulled a couple of mugs out of the cupboard. So, how come you're here? Are you staying over for a while? Boyd and Charlotte had concocted a story that her combi boiler had broken down and her house was without heating and hot water until a replacement valve could be fitted. Hopefully I can head back home tonight, she replied. I do really miss sleeping in my own bed. She watched Emma as she pulled a carton of soup out of the fridge and then went to the sink to rinse the thermos flask. I hope you don't mind me asking, Emma. Well, why aren't you talking to your dad? He's quite upset about it, you know. Emma turned around. I presume you heard what happened, she said, colouring slightly. Charlotte decided to downplay what she knew. I heard that your dad threw some chap out. By his hair, said Emma. Literally by his hair. She shook her head, clearly struggling to make sense of it. I mean, that's physical assault, isn't it? By my dad? For God's sake, by my dad, the policeman. Your dad's not a thug, Emma. Why would he do that, do you think? It doesn't sound like something he would do for no reason. Emma started to vigorously dry the flask in her hands. Dad walked in on us, okay? Patrick and me. He didn't knock first, just... She puffed her cheeks out, then blew. Jesus. He said he heard you saying no, replied Charlotte. He was worried about you. Emma's face flushed brightly. He told you, didn't he? He told you what he... He told me that Patrick was hurting you, that you had bruises. Emma clamped her eyes shut, mortified. Oh, God! And he's not just a lad, is he? Added Charlotte. He's a bit older. Emma turned her back and mumbled. He's 30-something, so what? It's over now anyway. He doesn't want anything to do with me. Charlotte could see Emma's shoulders shaking. She stepped forward, then touched her back lightly. Emma, she said gently, I was in a relationship like that once. He was a lot older, worldly wise, charming. I fell for him completely. He was my world. And it started out so wonderfully, but... She trailed off. Emma wiped her cheeks and turned to look back over her shoulder. But? Charlotte sighed. But the relationship changed over time. It became unbalanced. I became more of an object to him than a person. It wasn't nice. Emma turned round completely. You were in an abusive relationship? Charlotte nodded. A terrifying one. I ended up having to hide from him. Oh, God, replied Emma. I had no idea. I don't know the details of what your dad saw, but he did tell me that Patrick had you by the hair. It was a game, Emma muttered. God, I can't believe we're having this conversation. She put her face in her hands. Me neither, Charlotte smiled ruefully. And I can't believe I'm admitting this, she continued. But I know about those sorts of games. I wasn't always as, how shall we say, as prim and proper as I appear now. He said it was just a bit of fun, a little role play. I'll admit I wasn't keen, but I wanted to please him. Charlotte tutted. Isn't it funny how some men confuse role play with coercion? She reached for the kettle and snapped it off. If you have a man in your life who can get you to do something you don't want to in order to keep him, that's a big warning sign, Emma. Chapter 41. Boyd looked up from his screen to see Minter, Okaki, and Warren pulling on their coats and getting ready to join the general end-of-shift migration towards the double doors. You working late, Gav? Said Okaki. He looked at his watch. It had gone 5:30. The day had whizzed by while he'd been shuffling back and forth between his desk and Sutherland's office, assembling an evidence portfolio that ticked enough boxes for one Chief Inspector Alistair McBain of the Western Isles Force to get off his arse and mobilise a couple of plods to go and arrest Harris. Given that the operation would be ferry-dependent, they needed the paperwork sorted today so that the detectives would be ready first thing tomorrow morning at the terminal in Mallaig to catch the damn bloody thing. Hopefully not too late, he replied. I'm just making sure all the red tape is in place, or cut, or whatever, so we can get Harris over here ASAP. Okaki pulled a face. Good luck with that. Minter paused beside his desk. Is there anything I can do to help, boss? Boyd shook his head. No, I'm only waiting on confirmation that they're good to go tomorrow. Off you go, Derek Zoolander. He watched the puzzlement on Minty's face slowly resolve as he and the others made their way across the main floor. Just before he disappeared through the double doors, Minter turned and stared back at Boyd, then pulled the perfect blue steel pout. Boyd laughed and raised his hand in salute. Then, as the door closed behind them, he turned back to his screen. He grabbed his phone and dialed the number he'd tracked down minutes earlier. The phone rang a couple of times before someone picked up. Sarah Shah speaking, who's this? For a heartbeat, he toyed with giving the woman a false name, but then he figured that was just asking for trouble down the line. I'm DCI Boyd, Sussex CID, he said. I believe you're the supervising probation officer for Ewan Jones? Yeah, he's one of mine, she sighed wearily. What's he done? Nothing, yet. I only want to get your take on him. What Boyd actually wanted was the man's address so that he could go and talk to him himself. But as his gatekeeper, his parole supervisor was unlikely to give him that without just cause and a lot of paperwork. My take on Jones. She drew in a long breath. What are you asking for exactly? Whether I think he's going to be a difficult client? The short answer is no. So far he seems to be behaving himself. Why the call? Has he been following his license conditions? Boyd asked. Yes, I've got no complaints there. He's been calling in once a fortnight. What about a home visit? As in, have I conducted one yet? Yes, replied Boyd. Of course. As soon as the accommodation's arranged and they've moved in, there's one, then a follow-up visit once a month. Where's his accommodation? I can't give you the exact address, but it's in Dover, if that helps. That's all I can tell you. Boyd realized belatedly that he hadn't really planned this conversation out. He'd sort of hoped that he could wangle the address, or at the very least her take on whether Jones had been properly assessed before being let out on license. And when was your last home visit? He asked. He heard paper rustling as Shah looked it up. A few weeks ago. And? Shah sighed again. And what? What is this? Well, I assume you look around, right? Evaluate how they're adjusting on the outside, whether they're coping, whether they're breaching any specific license conditions. Yes, of course. There were no indicators of drug taking or alcohol abuse, no indicators that he's broken curfew. Does he have an ankle monitor? That's not one of his license conditions. So he could have broken curfew, Boyd pointed out. Yes, I suppose it's possible. But from what I could see, he's been keeping himself busy enough with his painting. To be honest, he's quite a good artist. He enjoys watching Portrait Artist of the Year. Said he was hoping to submit one of his self-portraits. That sounds encouraging. Yes. I mean, I'm not sure the show would allow an ex-con on, but it's good that he's making plans. Finding a harmless displacement activity to fill their time is one of the biggest problems we have. It's almost impossible to find them jobs, particularly clients like Jones. Boredom's often a real problem. They have too much time to dwell on the past. It's easy to slide back into old habits. Well, you're not seeing that with Jones? No. He's been a busy little bee. His room's like a gallery, pictures plastered all over the walls. I warned him the landlord might give him some stick if he carried on using pins. He said he's switched to using blue tack now, said Shah. What things has he been painting? Some landscapes. Nice ones, actually. I'd buy one if he wanted to sell them. I told him that maybe he could make money from selling his work. Perhaps set up a market stall or something. It's good to give them a goal to aim for. So he's just been painting landscapes then, nothing else? Boyd asked. He heard Shah take a long drag on a vape. What are you, a cop or the Guardian's art critic? He paused, wondering how much to share. You know what he was in for? He said finally. Yes, of course I do, Shah replied. Right. Well, he was fixated on a woman with a certain look. His ex-wife, in fact. The woman he abducted looked a lot like her. At the time he was arrested, he'd been painting multiple portraits of youngish, brown-eyed women with hazel-coloured hair. I don't recall seeing any, Shah told him. I can send you a picture of his room if you like. Could you? Uh-huh. We take them as part of the home visit to show how they've settled in. We send them to the parole board to review. That would be really helpful if you could do that, Boyd said. My phone number is... Email, she cut in. Work email. Just in case you're some tabloid sleaze or offenders list vigilante. I mean, you don't sound like one, but... Fair point. He gave her his work email. When is he due to contact you next? Boyd asked. He heard rustling paper again. Ah, actually, he's on my visit list for tomorrow, Shah replied. Okay. Well, look, can I leave you my number, just in case there's anything you spot tomorrow? You want me to call you? Yes. That's not really how this works. Look, I know there are proper channels, but this is a case I'd like to keep tabs on, unofficially. Unofficially? She sounded guarded. Please. I've read his case file. I'm no expert, granted, but you and Jones's mental condition on arrest and interview was largely played down at his trial. It's a just-in-case thing, nothing more. Shah vaped again. Sure. All right, I'll take your number. I'm not saying I'll use it, and I'll want you to reply to my email to your work address first. But let's have it. What was the name again? DCI Boyd. He heard her scribble it down. Then he gave her his iPhone number rather than his work phone. She assured him she'd send the email as soon as she hung up. He ended the call and looked up to see the first of CID's night shift had turned up. It was D.I. Abbott, armed with a coffee and a greasy Cornish pasty, and looking ready for a night dozing in his chair with his feet up on his desk. Chapter 42. Boyd had his coat optimistically draped over one arm as he leant into Sutherland's office. Is there any news back from Scotland yet? Sutherland looked up from his keyboard. Oh, yes. Yes, there is. It's a go for tomorrow. Boyd, don't tell me you were hanging around for that. He nodded. Oh, sorry. Well, yes, we're good to go. Boyd gave him a thumbs up and headed off towards the double doors, muttering to himself about communication, or lack thereof. He hurried out of the station into the glow of the amber-saturated lighting across the pool cars and parking area. It was icy cold, and the rain had turned to sleet. He unlocked his capture, climbed in, and turned the engine on. The windows were fogged up and would need a few moments of the blower to clear. He looked at his phone and saw that there was a text from Charlotte. Emma and I chatted today. You should know she's okay with you. She knows why you did what you did, and I think she's grateful, but mostly she's embarrassed. That's why she's been avoiding you. I get the feeling she no longer wants to date the young man she was seeing. Boyd tapped out a quick reply. Thanks for talking with her. I think we were both a bit embarrassed about the whole thing. He wondered if he should mention his unofficial snooping around Jones to her. So far, Charlotte knew nothing about what had happened to Jones after she'd left him. She didn't know either that Boyd had seen her battered and bruised face on the one occasion she'd gone to the police about him. He wondered if he'd ever get that image out of his mind. What she certainly didn't seem to know anything about was the abduction, his arrest, and the fact that he'd served 14 years at Her Majesty's pleasure. Telling her all that would undoubtedly terrify her, and if the man who'd loitered outside her back garden for a couple of nights on the go was just some crackhead, then he'd be unnecessarily waking something up that she'd worked for years to put to bed. In any case, The talk he'd had with Jones's parole supervisor had sounded encouraging. Yes, Jones was out of the clink, but it sounded as though he might have moved on from obsessing over Charlotte. Maybe it would be better to keep quiet for now. He tucked the phone into his jacket pocket. The windows had now cleared enough for him to make a move. He reversed out of his parking spot, drove over to the exit, and out onto Bohemia Road. As he passed the paddle pond and the crazy golf course on the seafront, both sporting forlorn Christmas lights and still open for business despite the drizzle, he felt his phone vibrate in his jacket. He resisted the urge to fish it out to see if it was Charlotte again, or Emma reaching out with an olive branch. The number of times he'd beeped at some muppet on his phone while driving and flashed his warrant card for good measure, it would make him the world's biggest hypocrite if he did the same. He waited until he was parked up outside his house on Ashburnham Road before retrieving his phone to see who'd texted him. It was an unknown number. Messaging here instead of your work email. I know you're doing this off the books, so I'll keep it that way. Just wanted to be sure you weren't a tabloid twat. Pics to follow. An image pinged up on his screen, and he immediately tapped it and zoomed in. The picture showed the interior of a small hostel room. A solitary bay window fogged by a tatty net curtain gave the room a little bland grey daylight. There was a bed, a side table, and a small breakfast table with one wooden chair pulled up at it. It would have been a Spartan, clinical interior if it hadn't been for the drawings and paintings that crowded the walls. The breakfast table was cluttered with paints and pastels, and something that looked like a work in progress. In the photo, he could even see a bit of Ewan Jones himself. His knees, with his hand resting on them, were visible in one corner. The man was doing his best in a small space to get out of the way and was perched on the end of his bed. Another photo pinged through. He tapped and zoomed in once again. This one showed the wall to which Jones had stuck most of his pictures. Shah clearly wanted to show the parole board that her client was keeping himself occupied. And she'd been right. Most of the pictures were landscapes, pastel, charcoal, and chalk depictions of coastal scenes. He recognized the white cliffs of Dover, a lighthouse, some fishing boats drawn up on a beach, a moody wetland scene with a heavy sky, all of them what Boyd thought of as the kind of art that ends up being ignored on the wall above the fireplace of a grubby pub. But they weren't all landscapes. His eyes were drawn to one small portrait near the edge of the photo. He zoomed in on it, but enlarged it became blocky and pixelated. He zoomed out again and took in a sharp breath. It was Charlotte, he was sure. It was a younger version of her, though. Her face was rounder and her hair was pulled back by an Alice band. Her shoulders were narrow. It looked like Charlotte as a child. Just then, he heard a soft tapping that made him jump. He looked up to see Charlotte, peering in through the passenger side window. "Are you all right?" she asked through the glass. He put his phone away, opened the door and climbed out. "Sorry, Charlotte, it's work. Even when you're off, you're not off," he said, quickly locking the car and rounding the front. "Nia and I were wondering whether we might be taking advantage of your hospitality," she began. "Maybe it's time we stopped being silly and headed back home." Boyd shook his head. "You're not taking advantage, Charlotte. Stay another night." Well, that's very kind of you, Bill, but I really need to get back to—" He placed a hand on her arm to stop her. "Charlotte, we need to talk." Chapter 43. Her home was a modest one. A two-up, two-down terraced house in a part of St. Leonard's that looked as though it had seen better days. For some reason, he'd been expecting more from her, something grander. In prison, Ewan had often speculated as to whether she'd managed to find another partner, or whether she'd decided to go it alone. His instinctive guess had been that she would choose independence for the rest of her life. He couldn't blame her for that. He'd had time to reflect on what he'd put her through all those years ago. She'd stepped from her teenage years straight into his arms, and not long after that into a marriage. Of course, she'd be single now, and anyway, her humble little place screamed spinster living alone. The only thing missing were cats. He picked his way through her front room. It was not much bigger than the cell he'd spent the last 14 years living in. There was an armchair with a side table and a lamp beside it. He could see a small stack of novels that she was working her way through concurrently. There was an open fireplace that contained a bed of ashes and charcoal. There was a rocking chair, a grandfather clock, which she must have inherited from her beloved grandparents, and a small afterthought of a TV. It was all very old-fashioned, but that was so Charlotte. He'd met her when she was young, but she'd always seemed to have such an old soul. He glanced at the pictures on the walls. There were none of his paintings, of course. He supposed it was hardly surprising. There were a couple of Edward Hopper prints that reflected her own preference for solitude, and a black and white photograph of Hastings Promenade from a grander time, when gentlemen donned straw hats and women wore bonnets. He spotted an item on the bookshelf that he recognized from their years together. A flute case. It contained the flute she'd played as a girl, with dreams of joining a prestigious orchestra. The case was covered in dust. He wondered if she played it at all now, or just kept it as a touchstone to her childhood. She'd rarely played it when they were together. You never did anything much, did you? When he first met her, she'd seemed like quite a handful, a bubbly girl, prone to fits of laughter and impulsive suggestions. If it hadn't been for her face, that stunning resemblance, her feisty personality might have put him off. But she soon became more manageable, pliable even. So besotted was she with him that she quickly surrendered her old self and became the muse that he wanted. A lifelike mannequin for him to pose and paint. His Pinocchio puppet, who learned very quickly, clever girl, that her opinions and spontaneous conversation starters weren't required. "Bill, what is it?" asked Charlotte. He led her into the dining room and they sat down. "Bill?" she repeated, looking alarmed. "Charlotte, I did some digging on Ewan Jones," he said. She nodded. "I thought you might." "Please don't get into trouble, Bill. It's ancient history. You thought it might be him standing outside your garden," he reminded her. "So no, it's not ancient history to you, is it?" She put her head in her hands. "You're right. I can't lie. I still have nightmares sometimes." She looked up at him. "You searched him on your police computers?" He nodded. "Please," her voice faltered. "Please tell me you found nothing." He was still in two minds about how much she needed to hear. "Bill," he sighed wearily. "Ewan Jones," he began, "went on to violently assault and abduct a woman after you escaped him. He may have been intending to kill her." "Oh, my God!" Charlotte blanched, and a hand flew to her mouth. "Look, I'm really sorry to have to tell you this, but we need to take him seriously, and we really need to talk about him." Ewan Jones spotted a copy of the local paper on her armchair, the Arg.
Just a short break. Rest your eyes, rest your mind. This audiobook is free. Thank you for watching the video.
asparagus. He'd seen that paper before in his local cafe, lying there on a table. And thank you very much. It was in that particular paper he'd glimpsed a photo of Charlotte, her face turned to look back over her shoulder at the press as she knocked on a front door. The news had been all about a train hijacking near Hastings and an off-duty police officer who'd been instrumental in bringing the incident to a close. That eye-catching story was, of course, nothing compared to the breaking news that Charlotte was apparently alive and well and living in Hastings. He recalled having to sit down at the table, trembling as he stared at the grainy depiction of her face. The table was already occupied by another lonely and regular patron, another ex-con out on license, no doubt trying to make his tepid coffee last the whole morning. He remembered simply staring and staring, the paper rustling in his shaking hands, and hearing the voice for the first time in years. The voice that used to shriek and beg in his head, the voice that had quietened down during his years in prison to little more than a bedtime whisper. The voice that was now back with a vengeance. My Lottie. My little Lottie. She looked like me, whispered Charlotte. She looked quite a lot like you, Charlotte, and he was clearly intending to kill her. He had a kit with him to... Charlotte felt the air in her lungs escape with a desperate whistling gasp, and she struggled to pull another breath in. Taking her somewhere to do that, then dispose of her body. Some part of her understood that Bill was saying more than she was taking in right now. She was still focused on 3 words. Looked like you. He's been in prison for the last 14 years and was released on parole 3 months ago, Bill's voice continued. She was dimly aware that she was feeling lightheaded, dizzy. She was glad to be sitting and holding the side of the table, or she might have lost her balance. Bill was still talking. You told me he was obsessed with painting you over and over? That was his thing, right? His obsession? She focused and nodded. He called her Lottie, the girl in his head, the one he kept trying to paint. And you're certain it wasn't you he was referring to? She shook her head. No, I thought it was me at first. Charlotte, Lottie, right? I thought he was idolizing me, romanticizing me. He wasn't, though, was he? Maybe at first he was. But then later, when he began to turn frighteningly strange and possessive, he referred to the face in those paintings as if she was someone else entirely. He never actually said it in so many words, but he was painting someone else, someone he called Lottie, someone from his past. She looked up at Boyd. A ghost. Ewan sat down at a small round kitchen table. The room was lit by a sickly vanilla-coloured bulb that hung from the ceiling in a cream lampshade. Just like me, Charlotte, eh? He smiled at the thought that with every meal he'd eaten alone in his cell, she'd been doing the exact same at this stark wooden table. He wondered if she ate in silence or whether she put on Radio 3. Perhaps she listened to one of her Eric Satie LPs on the turntable in the living room to drown out the fact that she was all alone. He listened to the gentle rumble and tick of her boiler as the central heating came on. Then he reached over to open the fridge. Inside there was a carton of milk and a plate of leftovers. She'd obviously left in a hurry, not worrying about turning the heating down or emptying the fridge. He must have spooked her the other night. He'd been a little too careless, too close to the gate, and that fucking dog of hers had gone ballistic. Where have you fluttered to, Charlotte? Where have you flown, my little love? He took the milk out of the fridge to make himself a cup of tea, and then checked the cupboards for mugs and tea bags. He filled the kettle and then wandered out into the hallway while it started to gurgle. He tapped his bottom lip with his finger. "Where have you gone, Charlotte?" Not to her parents. She'd been smart about that the last time she'd escaped him. There had been phone calls and letters home, of course, but never an actual visit, because she knew he'd be watching their house. Her beloved grandparents were gone now, and she had no brothers or sisters. Then a friend, it has to be. The voice was begging him again, echoing in the darkness of his mind. "I want you to look at something," said Boyd. He pulled his iPhone out and set it on the table. "I had a chat with Ewan's parole supervisor this afternoon. They do home visits just to check their clients aren't returning to their old ways. Anyway," he thumbed the exchange he'd had with Shah onto the screen. "They take pictures for the record. She said Ewan was keeping himself busy with his paintings." He enlarged the image and Charlotte craned forward to look more closely. "They're very different to what he painted when I was with him." "How so?" "Well, before they were mostly Lottie, of course, and they were usually against dark backgrounds." "Dark-coloured?" Boyd asked. "Mood, colour, composition, all of it was dark. He worked in black, white and red mostly. These," she gently slid the zoomed-in image across the screen, studying each picture in turn, "these are natural landscapes. The colours are a bit less stark. Look, there's some green, some yellow there. Good Lord, even some flowers." Boyd noticed that the frantic tone in her voice was easing a little. "The pictures he was doing right at the end, just before I got away from him, Bill, they were violent, really disturbing. These look much better." "Violent?" Charlotte looked at him. "He was painting pictures of Lottie, or me, spattered with blood, dismembered, with facial disfigurements, with bloody eyes." She shuddered and turned back to Boyd's phone. "But these look much healthier. I mean, if this is a representation of what's in his head, then—" The idyllic image of a couple of fishing boats drawn up on a beach caught her eye. She zoomed in and fumbled the phone, dropping it onto the dining table. "Charlotte? Oh, my God, Bill! What is it?" He picked his phone up and looked at the painting. There was nothing he could see that was upsetting, just two weathered, upturned hulls lying on shingle. "It's Hastings," she whispered. She pointed at a row of tall black huts in the background. "The net huts. They're unique to Hastings." She glanced at him. "Oh, God, Bill, it's him. He knows I'm here." Ewan stood in the hallway, gazing at the front door, crimson and blue light spilling through the coloured glass from the street lamp outside. It's okay. I'll find her," he muttered. The hallway was empty, except for a side table with a small lamp. He turned the lamp on, and a warm pool of light illuminated a dark wooden tabletop. There was an old rotary dial phone on it. He smiled. That was Charlotte, forever stuck in the rose-tinted bubble of her childhood. Beside the phone was a green leather phone book. He flipped it open, wondering how many names he'd find there. He didn't think that many. This home spoke of someone who was content with her own company. He was right. There were hardly any entries. Under A in Charlotte's neat handwriting were A. Melford and AAA Taxis. Under B, Bill Boyd. Boyd. That was a name he'd heard before, recently too. She'd drawn a little smiley face beside his number. Bill. Is that a friend, Charlotte? A special one, perhaps? Ewan smiled. Boyd, he suddenly had it. He'd read it in the same copy of the Argus that a picture had been in. In the same article, in fact. Boyd was the off-duty copper who'd been involved in the train incident, wasn't he? Chapter 44. The two boys sat on the roof of the tower. The wooden planks up there were thick with dried layers of seagull shit, but it gave a commanding and spectacular view of the wetlands and, further along in the distance, the campsite. The lanky boy chose a beam of wood to sit down on. "They built these to destroy Napoleon," he said, "if he was going to invade, like." The posh boy sat down next to him and let the shoulder strap of his holdall slide off. "You hungry?" "Yeah." Posh unzipped the bag, pulled out his lunchbox, and peeled off the stiff Tupperware lid. "My name's Ewan, by the way. What's yours?" "Richard," replied the lanky boy, "but everyone calls me Ricky." "I've got Marmite sandwiches, an apple and some sweets," Ewan said, "and I managed to sneak in a couple of Dairy Lee triangles when my grandma wasn't looking." Ricky peered into the box and grinned. "Awesome! You've got the Batman one," he said, pointing at the Pez dispenser. Ewan fished out a sandwich for Ricky. "So why's this place called Devil's Tower, then?" Ricky took a hearty bite of his sandwich and talked as he chewed. "'Cause devil worshippers used to sacrifice kids here, didn't they?" Ewan's eyes rounded. "Seriously?" "Oh, yeah," Ricky nodded. "Hundreds of them down in the dungeons." "There's dungeons?" "Sure. They go down really far, but it's flooded at the bottom. I reckon you'd find about a gazillion bones if you went down." Ricky looked at him. "Do you know they once raised the actual devil down there?" Ewan nibbled at his sandwich. All of a sudden, he wasn't feeling quite so hungry. "There's no such thing," he replied. Ricky snorted. "No? They raised him, and he ran out in the sea, left big hoof marks in the marsh." Ewan shook his head. "No, I don't believe you. That's ridiculous." "Really?" Ricky pointed down at the swirling dips and humps of the marshland below. "There, look. You can still see the outlines." Ewan craned his neck to look over the crenellated brick battlements. There were plenty of round pools below, surrounded by crests of tall grass. "Are those his footprints?" he asked. "Yeah. He'd have to have been blimmin' huge." Ricky looked at him, dead serious. "He was. I mean, he was as big as this tower," was Evan's reply. "Yeah, right." The story was sounding far too tall now, and his appetite comfortably returned. If the devil bit was rubbish, so probably was the story about a host of dead children down below them. Ricky had finished his sandwich. "You going to eat the apple?" Ewan looked down at his lunchbox. "We can share it." Ricky reached in and grabbed it. He took a big bite. "When we're done, I'll show you the dungeon if you like." Chapter 45. Boyd drove to work wondering whether it had been the right thing to do to insist that Charlotte stay at his today. Perhaps it was an overreaction on his part, but since the White Rock Theatre overlooked the beach, and Ewan Jones had quite possibly taken a day trip to Hastings to draw his fishing boats, it felt like the appropriate precaution. But it had meant leaving her at his home with nothing to do and plenty to think about. "It's just for today," he told her. He was going to call Jones's parole officer later to see if she'd been able to do a home visit and for confirmation that he was still in Dover where he should be. Boyd parked up in the pool car area and climbed out of his car, making a conscious effort to switch his mind to work. He'd been copied into an email to Sutherland, informing him that Ricky Harris had been arrested early this morning and was in transit down to Gatwick. Boyd decided that he'd give Minter and Warren the job of meeting and taking over custody of him. Warren would be a familiar face for Harris, and Minter's formidable build would be more than enough to convince the wheezy old rocker not to play silly buggers. He entered the station, grabbed a coffee from the canteen on the top floor, then finally settled down at his desk and logged on to Leeds. There was an email from a legal firm saying they'd been contacted by Harris and would be sending over a solicitor to sit in on the interview, and please could he state when that was scheduled to take place. He tapped back a quick reply. It would most likely be about 5, since they were mandated to allow Harris some rest time before they could begin, which was good. It gave Boyd time to review the information they'd gathered so far and think through his interview strategy. Harris had been pretty open with them last time, but now he was under caution and would be accompanied by a solicitor. His responses were likely to be a blanket wall of no comment. He spotted Minter settling in at his desk. "Morning, David Ginola." Minter looked up, then rolled his eyes. Very funny, boss. I'm still not sure I've totally recovered from the Zoolander comment." He frowned. "Who's Ginola, anyway?" "An ex-footballer with great hair. Maybe that's what the agency are after, your lovely hair." Minter absently raised a hand to run it through his glossy dark locks, then stopped himself. Boyd smirked and gave him the good news that he had the job of collecting and babysitting Harris this morning. "So you and Warren are off up to Gatwick to collect Harris. His arrival time's 11:30. Boyd looked at his watch. It was 8:47 a.m. "You'll need to leave here around 9:30 in case the roads are busy." "Right-o, boss, 9:30 it is," Minter replied. Boyd looked around the floor. "Do you know where our khaki is?" Minter shook his head. "No, I've not seen her this morning." Damn, he'd wanted to speak to her about yesterday's autopsies. "Okay." He reached for his coffee. "Oh, Minter, just a thought. Take vest cams with you. Harris will have already been cautioned by the Scottish police, but do it again on camera so that anything he babbles on about in the car is fair game. Right-o, boss, I'm on it." Boyd opened up the action log to refresh his memory on the points of the case so far. Warren's research on Dark Harvest, their lyrics, album covers, videos and the various 80s news stories about their on-tour antics were collated tidily for him to review. He was about an hour into it when his phone rang. It was Sully. "Morning, Boyd. We've got a surveyor called Arnold here who's waggling around a piece of paper that says he has the right to enter the tower and examine its structural integrity. He says he's been appointed by the UK MTPS to check—" For fuck's sake," Boyd muttered, cutting Sully off mid-flow. "Nicely put, Boyd," Sully said. "They were almost, but not quite, my first words too. We're nearly at the bottom now. There's only a few feet of water left to pump out, and we've installed a whole load of tension beams to brace the walls, as well as more scaffolding on the stairs, so we don't need another moaning Minnie down here. Personally, I'd tell him to sling his hook, but that piece of paper he has does—" "Fine," Boyd said, interrupting him again. "Just a look. Let him have a quick look, and don't let him bloody well touch anything." "I know," Sully replied tardily, and hung up. Boyd resumed picking his way through Warren's report. The DC had identified a number of lyrics that, in Harris's current situation, didn't look particularly good. Little angels with their lies, little sirens without eyes. Boyd made a mental note to present those to Harris this afternoon. Although the murders of Patricia Hemsworth, Chloe Hunter, and the other unidentified body were separated by decades, they'd each had their eyes removed. If he was going to delve into cod psychology, then perhaps it said something about guilt or remorse. The dull-eyed accusatory gaze of a dead victim was the thing that killers sometimes struggled with once the red mist cleared. Most often, though, they chose to throw a rag or some clothing over the victim's face. He reviewed the symbol that had been carved in the brick, which had also been a repeated motif for the band. It was a musical note, inverted, with two crossbars near the bottom, one wider than the other. The obvious symbology being that it was an inverted crucifix as well as a musical quaver. The devil's music, of course. It would have been foolhardy of Harris to carve something that was essentially his autograph on a brick near where he'd hidden a body. But then maybe he'd presumed it would never surface again. It was quite possibly an act of overconfidence. Or if he believed in all this woo-woo nonsense, He might have thought it conveyed some preventative power on the body being discovered. Boyd emerged from his action log digging at 5 to 1. There was a text from Minter to say that they had Harris in the car and were on their way back down to Hastings. He had also missed a call from Okaki. He dialed her phone and she answered immediately. "Hey, Gav." "Where the hell are you?" he asked her. "I'm back at LSC Forensics. I just wanted to check something out." "It would be helpful if you could let me know next time," he grumbled. "I know, I'm sorry, Gav. It was a spur-of-the-moment thing." She paused, clearly goading him to ask. Boyd was keen to get back to work, so he bit the bullet. "And?" "Since you asked so nicely, all 3 victims had striation marks on the bone around their orbital sockets, which indicates that their eyes were scraped out by the serrated blade of a Swiss Army penknife. That was the conclusion that Dr. Palmer and I reached after we compared different tools and blades yesterday." "A Swiss Army penknife?" "Yep. Jay's got one from the 70s, a hand-me-down. So I promised her I'd pop back with it this morning." "They don't have one there?" "Not all the different models, no. Not one that dates back as far as the 70s. Boyd winced. "It's not that long ago, Khaki." She laughed. "Sorry. Anyway, it's a match for all 3 bodies, which at the very least strengthens the case for the same killer with the same knife and the same MO. If Harris turns out to be our man, then he'll have to answer for all of them." "Good job," Boyd said. "Was there anything else newsworthy from Dr. Palmer?" "If you're hoping for DNA from the bodies, then no. There's nothing back yet. We're still waiting." He sighed. A match to Harris on one or other of the bodies would clinch it for certain. "Right, see you back at the station then," he said. "Good work, Okaki." He hung up and rang Charlotte. He wanted to check in on her before he got bogged down in work again. He dialed the house phone and got no answer. "Fine, she's walking the dogs." She'd said she might take them up to the woods around East Hill rather than down to the beach. He tried her mobile, and after a dozen rings it went to voicemail. A queasy flutter of concern shot through him. She normally took her phone everywhere. But it was possible that with 2 energetic dogs on leads and pockets full of poo bags, keys and her phone, she'd been unable to answer. He stifled the urge to drive back home and check in on her because there was an easier way to settle his mind, one that wouldn't make it look as though he was overreacting. He dialed Ewan Jones's parole supervisor, Sarah Shah. She'd said that he was on her house call list today. Again, though, there was no answer. He went through to voicemail, and this time decided to leave a message. "It's DCI Boyd. I'm just checking in on your visit to see Jones. Let me know how he is after you've been, if that's okay. I just want to know, he's where he should be." He hung up, the feeling of unease deepening. "Fine," he muttered to himself. He grabbed his car keys off the desk and got up. Chapter 46. Boyd drove back home along the front, frustrated by the maximum speed signs of 20 miles per hour as he approached Pelham Arcade. Really, those signs were pointless at this time of the year. There was hardly a pedestrian to be seen out there in the cold, gusting wind. The Christmas lights strung over the road swung dismally on their cables, making the seafront look even more cheerless and abandoned. A half-assed job was worse than no job at all as far as he was concerned when it came to window dressing a town for Christmas. He found himself slowing right down to study the 1 or 2 hardy fools out this afternoon. With hoods up and woolly hats on, there was little hope of identifying Jones among the passers-by. Boyd headed inland on the Bourne, then swung a right up the final steep hill of Ashburnham Road and parked his car outside his house. Usually, the unique sound of his Capture's engine would trigger the appearance of a wet brown nose pushed against the window, blowing twin circles of steam onto the glass. But not this afternoon. There was no sign of Ozzy. The sense of foreboding that had been troubling Boyd at work and followed him home, now intensified. He got out of the car and walked cautiously up the path to his front door. It was ajar. Conventional wisdom would dictate he was not to assume the worst, but then conventional folks didn't have a human ear sitting in their safe, or suffer from frequent nightmares about their decapitated son and dying wife. Boyd gently pushed the front door inwards and stepped into the porch, one hand reaching for the walking stick leaning against the rack of wellies. It was a worn and bleached branch that he'd picked up on a walk with Ozzy. It had a pleasing, smooth, large pommel of wood at the top that made him feel like Gandalf the Grey. He turned it round so that the weighty knuckle of wood was at the far end. He stepped forward into the hall and crept past the open door on the left that led into his study. The bottom of the stairs was ahead, the door to the lounge to his right. The hall leading to the dining room was around the corner. Another 2 steps forward, and he'd have to look in 3 different directions all at once. "Be ready, Bill," a soft voice cautioned him. He tightened his grip, then quickly stepped forward. He glanced up the stairs, nothing. He peeked quickly into the lounge. It was empty. Then turned the corner, looked down the hall, and let out a long, slow wheeze of air. He could see Charlotte through the dining room window. She was out in the back garden, hosing down both muddy dogs. She must have thought she'd closed the door properly. Sometimes the latch was lazy and it needed a good slam to engage properly. He shook his head, almost in a state of collapse, as he returned to the porch and put the stick back. He pushed the front door firmly shut and announced loudly that he was home. A moment later, both dogs' nails skittered across the wooden floor as they raced each other up the hallway to greet him. "Where's your mummy?" he asked Mia. "I'm her mummy, aren't I?" Charlotte said, appearing in the dining room doorway. She smiled. "What are you doing home so early?" "I'm just back for lunch," he replied. "The canteen's offerings are bloody awful today." Chapter 47. Sully was rather impressed that the surveyor had thought ahead and brought his own waders with him. The depth of the water in the flooded basement was now only about 2 or 3 feet, depending on where one stood on the undulating floor. Gavin Marchant had pulled up his hose and departed earlier that day, keen to make a swift exit from this particular job. Sully had bristled at first when the surveyor, James Arnold, had pushed his way past the tape, waggling his piece of paper around, claiming he had some obscure parochial authority to invade the hallowed space of a crime scene. But, after talking him through the do's and don'ts, and then discovering he was a passionate historical reenactor who specialized in the English Civil War and the Napoleonic era, Sully was beginning to warm to him. Reenacting, or as Boyd and his uncultured merry band would undoubtedly call it, playing soldiers, was an interest that Sully had been courting in recent years, particularly musket-era history. All that powder smoke and the smell of cordite, the odour of wood smoke and saddle wax from their historically accurate campsites, it was marvellous stuff. Arnold panned his torch along the walls and then upwards towards the fragmented floorboards above them. "Yes, you can see some historic bowing of the walls," he said, "and that would have happened back when this fort was actually being used. They obviously built this one on ground they didn't think was going to give." He looked at Sully. "They panic-built a lot of these, thinking old Boney was massing his ships to invade, you know." "Oh, I do," said Sully. Arnold shone his torch along the beams of wood supporting the floor above. "The presence of water down here all this time has effectively equalized the pressure against the brickwork. Otherwise, those support beams would have come down long ago. Essentially being flooded has helped preserve this place. As you can see, we've put up support beams and some scaffolding to—" Arnold shook his head. "It's fine as a short-term measure, but honestly, Stephen Knight is quite correct. This whole void needs filling with concrete as soon as possible. The surveyor waded across the uneven floor to get a closer look at the wall on the other side. He stumbled and almost went over into the water. Bugger! Sully waded over towards him. Are you all right? Ugh, I've got some water down the inside of my... Oh, it's freezing. He reached down into the water to see what he'd stepped on. I tripped on a bloody basket or something. He lifted the something partially out of the water, panned his torch across it, and dropped it like a hot stone and recoiled several steps. Oh, good God! He exclaimed. Was that a rib cage? Chapter 48. Boyd hit the record button. Interview date, Tuesday, December the 15th. The time is 5 p.m. Present in the room are DCI Boyd and DC Warren. The interview subject, Ricky Harris, and his solicitor. Jason Pinner, the solicitor supplied. Boyd settled his notes on the table in front of him, keeping them face down for the moment. Hello again, Ricky, he said. Good journey down. Ricky Harris stared sullenly back at him. Go fuck yourself, Boyd. Boyd smiled. Well, that's a better start than no comment, at least. He picked up the page of question prompts that he'd prepared earlier. Right then, let's see if we can take the direct route and save ourselves a lot of time, shall we? He began. Were you, Ricky Harris, involved in the murder of Patricia S. Hemsworth on July the 27th, 1971? Pinner leant in to advise Harris to give a no comment, but Harris shook his head. I'm not doing no comments because I've got nothing to fucking hide. The answer is no, I wasn't. Were you present at the Martello Tower, known as Devil's Tower, on that date? Pinner leant in again and Harris snapped, Just leave it, man, I'm fucking fine. He turned back to Boyd. No, I never even visited the bloody place. I told you that when you were sat drinking tea in my home not so long ago. But you were aware of the tower, even as a boy? Boyd continued. Harris nodded. I told you that already too. All the kids in the area knew about the place and the ghost stories that went with it. And what stories were those? Boyd asked. Rituals, child sacrifices, raising devils. Harris smirked. It was all good stuff, great material. Inspiration for your heavy metal career, eh? Harris nodded. Of course. Gruesome sacrifices and satanic rituals. It's all bread and gravy for album sales, man. So in 1989, you bought this tower that you'd never seen before and never visited? Boyd continued. Like I said. Why did you do that? Harris sighed. We've done this all before, man. Not under caution, replied Boyd. So? I thought it would be cool as a recording studio. Turned out to be a big fucking mistake because a bunch of local arseholes called the Martello Protection Society or whatever and their arsehole-in-chief Stephen Knight said I couldn't do a fucking thing to it, all right? So you had no use for it then? Harris shook his head. No. Did you try to sell it? Harris shrugged. Half-heartedly. I mean, I wasn't out there going door to door, but yeah, if I couldn't do anything with it, I didn't want it anymore. But it took you 30 years to find a buyer? Sure. Boyd looked down at the notes he'd made this morning. Stephen Knight claims he made repeated offers to you over the years to buy it. Yeah, but they were shitty little offers. I was holding out for a decent one. Even though no one else was interested? Even though no one else made any offers? Even though you've admitted you needed money in recent years? Yeah, so what? Boyd was becoming more than a little irritated with his arsey manner. Maybe it was time to give Harris a little shake. Ricky, let me put it to you that you bought the tower simply to prevent anyone else from buying it at a later date and either restoring it or developing it. And why the fuck would I do that? Harris scoffed. To keep anyone from finding the body of Patricia Hemsworth and whoever else you dumped there. What? Who the fuck is Patsy whatever? His solicitor leant over and whispered into his ear. Harris nodded and said, No comment. Boyd nodded subtly at Warren to go ahead with his list of questions, which were more of a deep dive into the meanings of his lyrics and the inverted musical note symbol included on all Bad Harvest's album covers. Harris seemed happy to follow the interview in that direction for a while. He seemed more than a little flattered that someone as young as Warren had taken the time to sift through his old songs to cherry-pick lyrics to cross-examine. Boyd let them run with it for about 10 minutes. Harris's guard seemed to be gradually dropping, and he was starting to become more talkative again. Boyd decided to step back in and shake Harris's cage again with the forensic evidence. "Ricky," he said, "we know that you visited the tower. More to the point, you visited the tower on the same day that Patricia Hemsworth went missing." He let that hang in the air for a moment, hoping that Harris might step out of his safe space to ask how they might know that. He didn't. "Ricky Harris, your DNA is present on items found alongside her body." There was a momentary flicker of a reaction on his face. There 1 second smothered the next with an expression of heavy-lidded boredom. "Can you—"
Let's pause here for a moment. This entire audiobook is free for you to enjoy. No rush. We'll continue in a moment. Thanks for watching.
"Explain that?" Boyd asked. "No comment," he mumbled. "There was your DNA, and there was also someone else's DNA. Come on, Ricky, who were you there with?" "No comment." "See," Boyd leant forward on his elbows, "there's an opportunity for you to help us here, to help bring some closure to this, and that's something that could well be taken into consideration on sentencing. Come on. Who was with you that day? Another kid? A school friend, maybe?" "No comment." "Was it a game that went too far?" "I said no comment." His solicitor reached for his arm. "My client refuses to comment." Boyd was tempted to bring in the other confirmed body, Chloe Hunter, but until they had DNA evidence from Elsie to confirm a link to Harris, even though there were MO similarities, he had to keep that powder dry. "All right," he said finally. "I'm suspending the interview for now. The time is 5:26 p.m. Warren hit the stop button while Boyd gathered up his notes. "We'll pick this up tomorrow then," said Boyd. "What time?" asked Pinner. "I'll let you know." Boyd watched as the custody officer walked Harris out of the interview room. Pinner put his notepad into his briefcase, nodded to the detectives, and left too. "And it started out so well," Boyd said to Warren. "Hopefully Elsie will come through with the DNA forensics tomorrow, in which case, who knows? He might roll over and give us a name for the other profile." Boyd's phone buzzed. He pulled it out and saw that it was Sully calling him. "How are things over at Faulty Tap?" "Boyd!" Sully blurted out. "I think I've just discovered where that spare humorist came from." Boyd called Charlotte as Minter drove the pool car through the rush-hour traffic on London Road. A stop-start stream of brake lights and headlights that caught swirling clouds of exhaust in their glare. "Hello there," she answered cheerfully. "I might be a bit late coming back tonight. We've had a sudden new development on the case," he said. "All right," she replied. "I thought I'd have a little dig around in your underwhelming kitchen, and I've decided to make a casserole. It'll keep until you get back. Now, before you go, I have an important question. Are you a dumpling man?" Boyd, suddenly starving, inwardly cursed this bloody job. Dumplings? Love 'em. He glared at Minter, who'd let out a hastily stifled laugh. Good, Charlotte replied. Will you text me when you're on the way back? I'll have dinner ready for you when you get in. Will do. Thanks. He hung up. Minter turned to look at him. Was that you a lady friend from the party asking if you wanted her dumplings, boss? He laughed. No, what's the name? Boyd smiled. Charlotte. Yes, that's it. He overtook a Tesco's home delivery truck. That's getting a bit more serious, is it? She's just a friend. Just a friend, Boyd repeated. He looked out at the darkening sky. It was 5 o'clock and the last vestige of grey daylight was lingering still. Her central heating's packed up, so she's sofa surfing at mine until she can get it fixed. Bloody nightmare getting a boiler man out these days, eh? He couldn't tell if Minter was making conversation or fishing. I've heard it can take weeks to get someone out, Minter said, glancing over at Boyd. So how long is she staying, boss? Boyd nodded. Fishing. The way it's going, she'll probably be here for Christmas. Hopefully, he added silently. Minter gave him a conspiratorial wink. Good on you, boss. They arrived at the tower just before 6. The pool car's headlights picked out Sully emerging from the tower entrance with a blue body bag, carrying it in his arms like a child. So now we have 4, said Minter, as he pulled up beside Sully's van. Well, we had 4 anyway, said Boyd. I think someone would know if they lost an arm. He climbed out of the car. Sully? Boyd, he replied as he set the body bag down in the back of his van. This one was right at the bottom. You can walk on the bottom now? Boyd asked. With waders, yes. Boyd noted the other vehicle, and the man doubled over beside it. That, I presume, is the surveyor? Sully nodded. Poor chap left most of his lunch down there. Completely compromised the crime scene, he said, chuckling to himself. How much of the body have you got? Most of it, Sully replied. I'll need to bring my team in tomorrow to do a proper fingertip search across the bottom. And after that, you'll be happy to hand the tower back to the owner? Sully nodded. Then, turning to face Minter, Hello there, gorgeous. When's the Vanity Fair shoot? Chapter 49. Charlotte looked down at both dogs. They were watching her slice the carrots into batons, like a pair of eager sous chefs, learning from a Michelin master. Oh, I see, she said. I have your full attention now, do I? She looked down at Ozzy. Does Daddy do carrots with you too? She held out a freshly cut baton for him, and it vanished in a blur without touching the sides. Clearly he does. She held out another one for Mia, who more demurely took it lightly from her hand, as if it was delicately made sushi. It felt odd, nice, but so strange to be making a meal in Bill's kitchen. She felt like an imposter, as though she was indulging in a peculiar role-playing game. A small girl once again, playing house, making a meal from Lego bricks on a cardboard box cooker. She shook her head and smiled at the childhood memory. You're 55, Charlotte. You should be looking down at your own granddaughter playing little chef by now. Of course, that was never going to happen. Not from her family line, anyway. But perhaps there might be an outside chance of being grandma to somebody else's children one day. If she could let someone else in, that was. She tutted at her own coded language. Someone else? Let's be honest, she explained aloud to the dogs. He's years younger and worn a lot better than me, I feel. She shook her head as she chided herself for previously having told Boyd she was 50. She really had no clue why she'd done that. Perhaps she'd been trying to claim back some of the years she'd lost to Ewan. Both dogs cocked their heads, as if looking at her knowingly. Oh, you disagree? She added the sliced carrots to the casserole dish. Well, that's very generous of you. But I think I might be fooling myself here. I think I might have been, what's the expression the kids used? Friend-zoned? Ozzy barked. "Oh, need to go out?" She opened the back door and shooed both dogs into the garden before closing it behind them. More and more in recent months, she'd found herself entertaining fantasy vignettes. Her and Bill curled up together on a sofa, a book in one hand, a hot chocolate in the other. Improbable journeys in a battered old VW camper van. Dogs in the back and an empty road ahead of them, on their way down to the south of France, that sort of thing. "God help me," she muttered. "I'm turning into Shirley Valentine." The doorbell triggered a little old-fashioned copper bell high up in the kitchen wall, a lingering vestige from the days when Bill's house had been a Victorian girls' school. She realized it was probably Emma. She'd said she was due back this evening, and had probably forgotten her keys. Charlotte smiled, pleased with herself that Bill's daughter was coming home to the smells and bubbling sounds of dinner on the go. She was well aware that Emma was, to some degree, the gatekeeper to her father's heart. If something akin to a romance ever did blossom between them, she was certain it would require Emma's blessing to work. She went down the hallway, wondering how to greet Emma this evening. "I've got a casserole on the go for your dad. Can I tempt you?" "No, it's Emma's home too, don't forget." "I hope you don't mind my fumbling around in the kitchen. I thought I'd whip something up for dinner." That sounded better. She flicked on the light in the porch so that they wouldn't trip over each other in the dark, then pulled the door open. "Hey there, Emma, I hope—" For a frozen second, she didn't recognize the man. For a heartbeat, it could have been an Amazon delivery driver, a neighbor of Bill's, a colleague. "Hello, Charlotte," said Ewan Jones. Before she could slam the door in his face, his foot was wedged in the gap, and the heavy wooden front door juddered uselessly against it. He shoved it inwards and stepped inside, quickly, then calmly shut it behind him. "It's been a long time," he said softly. "I've missed you." Charlotte backed down the hallway. "Get out!" she cried. Then more forcefully, "Get out!" Ewan shook his head. "Why would I go when it's taken me all these years to find you again?" Apart from the fact that he'd aged noticeably, this could have been a badly stitched-together continuation of the very last time she'd laid eyes on him. She knew everything she'd needed to know about him from their time together. That he was capable of violence, that he was dangerously unwell, and that in the last 17 years he'd done far worse things than he'd done even to her. "Ewan, please!" She tried a more reasonable-sounding tone. "Leave me alone, it's over." "It's over when we're dead and gone," he whispered. Charlotte turned and ran, assessing her route as she did so. Right was for the lounge, a dead end. On the left was the dining room, another dead end, given that the back door was shut and there was no way out of the garden anyway. She reached for the stair rail and scrambled up the first few steps, expecting him to leap on her back at any moment. "Stupid bitch!" he snarled. She'd made it halfway up the staircase before she felt his vice-like grip around her ankle and lost her balance. He was on top of her a second later. His full weight was on her back. She felt his hot breath on her cheek and the bristles of his unshaven chin scratching the lobe of her left ear as he whispered hoarsely, "I've waited far too long for this." She desperately attempted to elbow his face, but he pulled his head back. "Oh, you've grown rebellious," he said, chuckling darkly. "Right then, you silly bitch. You're coming with me." Chapter 50. "All right then," said Boyd, clapping his hands together. "There's no point us all standing around out here in the bloody cold. There's nothing more we can do until tomorrow." Sully slammed the rear door of his van shut. "I'll have my team out here first thing in the morning." "Hold on," Boyd replied. "Shouldn't we get the pumping chap?" He looked at Minter. "What's his name?" "It's Gavin something, boss." The rest of the name came back to Boyd. "Gavin Merchant, that's it. Yeah, shouldn't we get him back here first thing tomorrow morning to pump it completely dry first?" Mr. Arnold, the surveyor, had recovered his composure and joined them. "You won't ever get it completely dry," he said. "The water will just keep coming in." "Well, we can get it down to just a few inches, can't we? Surely you'll need to see the bottom to do a fingertip search, Sully." "We can set up a grid pattern and feel our way," Sully replied. "It really won't take too long." "All the same, I want the water down as low as he can keep it with his pump going. Once we've finished with the searches, Mr. Knight can have it back." Boyd looked at the surveyor. "Do you want us to remove the scaffolding and tension bars before you—" "There's no need," said Arnold quickly. "Concrete mix can be poured straight in and around it all. It'll be fine." "Fair enough." Boyd checked his watch. It was 6:15. He pulled his phone out and dialed Okaki. Okaki drained her coffee and set the mug down on her desk. "The thing is, Warren, he's a cocky little arse. He'll fit right in with Flack's team, I'm sure. Those cowboys all seem to think they're in an episode of Breaking Bad." Warren shrugged. "I bet O'Neill ends up getting DS before me, though." Okaki pulled her coat off her desk. "Rosper is one big resource drain, and it's achieving piss all as far as I can see. If you're concerned about building up your performance record, then rapid case turnover's the way." "But," she scoffed, "you've been at DC for what, all of 5 minutes?" Warren was looking down at the penknife that had been hidden under her coat. "You brought a knife into work?" "Yeah," she replied, waggling her head with sass, "for close encounters with dumbass scroats." She picked it up. "I took it into Ellisy to compare the bone scrape marks around the orbital sockets. It's a Swiss Army knife, model 70, the first model to have one of these." She pulled out the short, serrated blade. "It's a match to the grooves," she said, miming how the killer would have scraped it around the eye socket like a spoon around a yogurt pot. "You need to sever the soft tissue before you can pop out the eyeball." "Oh, right," Warren tried not to grimace. "An exact match?" She nodded and folded the blade back in. "Uh-huh." She held out the knife handle for him to see the whole thing. "Here's an interesting fact. Apparently, this was the only Swiss Army model to have a white grip texture on the handle. It wasn't a great success. They went back to the normal smooth red handles afterwards." She could see Warren's interest waning and set the knife back down on her desk. Her phone buzzed. "I'm coming, Jay, I'm coming," she muttered, then saw it was Boyd. "Gav? You still at work?" he asked. She was almost tempted to say that she was on her way home. "Yeah, I'm still here." "Great. Can you get on to Gavin Merchant, the pump guy? His number will be in the action log. We need him back here tomorrow morning as early as he can make it." "Right," she said with a sigh, wondering why he dialed her number and not Warren's. "I heard something about another body." "We got the rest of the bones that go with our humerus by the look of it." "Always good to have the complete set," she replied helpfully. "We're going to do an all-hands fingertip search across the bottom tomorrow. Tell Warren to bring his wellies." "Will do." She hung up and looked at Warren. "Wellies tomorrow?" Chapter 51. Charlotte tried not to look too closely at the glinting blade of the kitchen knife. Half an hour ago it had been slicing carrots. Now it was hovering close to her neck. "Keep your eyes on the road, Charlotte," said Ewan. "I haven't driven in years," she said shakily. "And you weren't that good back in the day, were you?" He shook his head. "Pathetic, really." She nodded. "Keep him calm." Where are we going?" he finished in a mock whiny voice. She nodded again. "Don't worry your pretty little head about that," he replied. "I'll do the thinking." They were heading north out of Hastings. The traffic was moving more easily than she'd have liked. "Ewan," she began, uncertain which line to take. Plead with him? Reason with him? Argue? "You don't need to talk, Charlotte. Just drive. There's a good girl." "You have to get him to talk. You have to." "Ewan," she began again, "I know you were going through something back then. I know I could have been more—" "Shut up," he snapped. She glanced at him. You were starting to frighten me. Oh, dear, he said, chuckling. You were a bit of a mouse in those days, weren't you? Everything frightened you. No, she replied, not everything. It was just you. Oh, defiance, he grinned. That's new. I like it. I've grown up, you, and I'm not your child bride anymore. He laughed. Oh, but you were, weren't you? So young and naive, a little starstruck too, if I recall. She had been. Of course she had. His face had been in several newspapers. His artwork hung in galleries in London and New York. And yes, he'd been dashing, glamorous, worldly, the rock star of oil on canvas, a Sunday paper had once dubbed him. I left you because you were scaring me. There was no one else. I don't fucking care if there was anyone else or not, he snarled. He pushed the tip of the blade into the soft skin at the corner of her jaw. You're nothing to me, you stupid bitch. You weren't then, and you're even less so now. They were on the outskirts of town, out of the regular amber streetlights, and into periodic beats of darkness and light. Turn right at that junction, he said. She did as she was told. A signpost pointed towards the A28. They were heading east. You know, Charlotte, you were just a meat mannequin for me to pose and paint. That's all you were, nothing more. She knew she had to keep him talking. So why did you pick me? Why did you marry me then? He made a long sucking sound with his teeth. She heard something wet rattle in his mouth. Dentures, perhaps? He'd never been great with his teeth. I liked your look, he replied after a while. He turned to her. I liked your eyes. Chapter 52. Boyd let Minter drive back to Hastings. The Welshman grumbled all the way along the road from Rye as they crawled home at the rear of a long train of vehicles that had built up behind a truck carrying a holiday trailer. Boyd thought it best to let Charlotte know he was going to be delayed by a slow-going wide load. He called the house line and let it ring only a few times before trying her mobile. It rang until it switched to voicemail once again. Hi there, Bill here. Just to let you know my ETA is looking like it's going to be 7:30, maybe 7:45. Hope those dumplings are juicy and plump. He hung up and tucked the phone back into his jacket pocket. Oh, dear, 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 said Minter with a grin on his face. Please, Boyd replied, rolling his eyes. You're better than that, right? It's not just the dumplings, boss. Then what? It's Bill now, is it? Boyd shook his head as Minter laughed. He was saved from explaining himself further by the phone buzzing in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting to see Charlotte's name, but it was the parole officer, Sarah Shah. DCI Boyd, he answered. You asked me to call you if you and Evans broke his parole conditions. Well, he just has, she said flatly. What's he done? Boyd asked. I went round for a home visit earlier today. There was no answer. I tried again just now, and the long and short of it is it looks like he's done a runner, she replied. Today? None of the hostel residents have seen him for nearly a week. But you said that he's required to call in, which he's been doing. But obviously he's not been calling in from home. Shit, muttered Boyd. There's something else. One of his neighbours reported their vehicle as stolen a few days ago. Unless I'm adding 2 and 2 and getting 5, that could well be him. Have you gained entry to his room? Boyd asked urgently. I'm just waiting to. I have to have a police officer with me before I can go barging in. Call me back if he's there, he said, and hung up. Problems, boss? Asked Minter. Boyd redialed Charlotte's mobile number, but it went straight to voicemail again. Charlotte, it's Bill. Call me as soon as you get this message. It's urgent. He hung up. What's going on? Minter asked. Shit. He explained the basics to Minter and picked up his phone again. We should probably get a patrol car round to your place, boss. What do you think I'm doing? Boyd snapped. Charlotte had hoped for a chance to escape the car as they drove through the village of Camber. Ahead of them had been a pedestrian crossing outside a Premier off-licence, and as they'd approached, she'd prayed there'd be someone waiting to cross, forcing the traffic lights to red and thus giving her a chance to brake and scramble out. But the lights remained green, and a few moments later, they were back in dark countryside once again, heading along country roads flanked on either side by skeletal trees and leaf-choked ditches. They drove in silence. Charlotte had noticed a sign for Dungeness. If they kept going in this direction, they'd be in Kent soon. She finally mustered enough courage to try again. "Ewan," she said. She'd already squandered too much of the drive in silence. "Whatever you're thinking of doing, keep your voice even, calm, firm, and keep talking, damn it. We can change whatever that plan is." "What makes you think I have a plan?" Ewan replied. "I'm just doing what she tells me." "She?" Charlotte was almost too afraid to mention the name. "Lottie." He looked at her. "You never really did understand, did you?" "Could you explain it to me?" He huffed out a breath. "There were 3 of us in that marriage." She thought about that. He'd been fixated on a girl that he'd kept painting, a girl who looked very similar to her. He'd given a name that she'd initially thought was a pet name for her. Charlotte had believed that she'd posed and modelled for an artist who'd started out creating an idealised version of her, which had somehow become quite real in Ewan's troubled mind, a doppelganger, a twin. So yes, in a sense, there had been 3 of them. "Lottie's just an idea, Ewan," she whispered. "She's just a figment." He shook his head. "She's real. She's real. And she's so fucking angry." His voice rose in pitch to a childlike whine. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," he cried. Charlotte was almost certain he wasn't directing that at her. "Ewan," she said softly, "we can work this out. We can get you help." He turned to look at her. "No one's helped so far," he snapped. "Nobody fucking can. Don't you get it, you stupid bitch? I'm alone with this. It's my fault, my guilt. I've been trying to make it right again all my fucking life." Chapter 53. Minter growled at the slow-moving traffic. "Want me to put on the blues and twos, boss?" Boyd shook his head. "And go where?" he replied grimly. "If everything's okay, then it's fine, but if Jones has done anything, then the patrol car will be there in a minute." His stomach dropped. Voicing the options out loud felt like making them real. "We need to know if he's in his room first, alive or dead." He tried to calm his mind. If Jones had grabbed Charlotte, then the first useful thing to know would be the registration of the stolen car, so that he could put an all points out on it. If Jones had taken her, presumably he'd take her to familiar ground. Which was where? Not where he'd recently been put up. To Jones, that would be a random room in a random town. It would have to be a place he'd lived, spent time, a fairly isolated place where he felt confident. Boyd ground his teeth with frustration. He wished the bloody patrol car plods would hurry up and confirm that Charlotte was safe at home, or not. He kept checking his phone, waiting on Jones's parole officer to let him know whether Jones was in his room. The lack of response was killing him. He picked up his phone to call Okaki. She was still at work, with leads at her fingertips. She could dig out Jones's file and give him a list of possible locales where Jones might head. He was about to tap her name in his recents list when his phone buzzed. "Shah?" he answered. "Yes, we're in. And? He's not here, which means he's in breach of his parole conditions." "The bastard's arrestable. Right. Can I talk to the police officer with you?" "Sure." Boyd could hear the rustle of the phone being handed over and the clipped chatter of radio traffic in the background. "Who's this?" asked a male voice. "DCI Boyd, Sussex CID. Who am I speaking to?" "PC Ben Lloyd." "Listen, Ben, I need a reg number for the car that was reported stolen outside Jones's hostel. The parole officer said there was a report of a TWOC in the last few days." "Right, sir. Let me just call it in and—" Boyd's phone beeped. There was another call coming in. Shit. Ben, call me back on this number when you've got it. All right? Yes, sir. He ended the call and found himself speaking to another uniformed officer. Sir, this is P.S. Jaffrey. I'm inside your house. The front door was open. No sign of a forced entry, but your dogs are shut outside in the back garden. Boyd could hear them both barking and yipping desperately. There's no one in the property, sir, but there are clear signs of a struggle. Keep your cool, whispered Julia. If he's taken her, she needs you thinking clever. Boyd fought to stay calm. Jaffrey, there's been an abduction. The victim is called Charlotte Belfoy. She's female, white, and 55 years old. The suspect is her ex-husband, Ewan Jones, white, 62 years old. The suspect has previous for violent assault, abduction, and attempted murder. They'll almost certainly be in a stolen vehicle. I'm waiting on the details of that right now. Right, sir. I want you to search the house again. Just make sure he's gone and... Think clever, Bill. Look for any indication of where he's taken her. Get a patrol car to her home, too. He gave the officer her address. I'm somewhere out near Rye, but my colleague DCO Karki is at the station. She's your point of contact for any news. Have you got that? Yes, sir. Boyd ended the call and dialed Okaki. Gav? Charlotte's been abducted. Her bastard of an ex-husband got into my house and grabbed her. What? Oh, my God. What the actual... She gasped. Gav, abducted, are you sure? His name's Ewan Jones. Pull him up on leads. He's a fucking nutter. He immediately heard the clatter of her nails on a keyboard. He's got previous for abduction, violence, attempted murder, and he's been trying to find Charlotte for years. It's up, said Okaki. Ewan Lester Jones, 62. Paroled a few months ago. That's him. There are boots on the ground at mine, and boots heading over to her place. Call control and get this fucking elevated, please. She's almost certainly with him in a stolen car. You got a reg? Okaki asked. I'm waiting on it. Look, you're my point of contact. Minter and I are stuck in the middle of the bloody countryside with no idea which way to head. I'm on this, Gav. Just don't tell me to stay calm. I am fucking calm. I was going to say just sit tight, she said. We'll find her. Who's getting the registration number? It was a TWOC reporting in Dover a few days ago. Boyd fumbled in his mind for the address. Damn it. The street name was all he bloody needed. Something like Mullerton, Fullington... Bullingdon Avenue, said Okaki. Yes, that's the one. Silver Peugeot 206. Registration Foxtrot Papa 79 Foxtrot Delta Victor. I'll call that into control. All points warning. Thanks. He hung up and looked at Minter. She's only told me about this a couple of days ago. He shook his head. She was married to a bloke who... His phone buzzed again. Sorry, got another call. It was Shah. Yes? This is PC Ben Lloyd, sir. I've got the vehicle details. So have I. I need you to put out an APW across your force. Tell control the contact point is Sussex Police, Hastings, CID, DCO Karki. How's that spelt? Fuck's sake. Okeke. There are 2 adults in the car. 1 male, white, 62. 1 female, white, 55. The woman has been abducted and is at extreme risk of violence or murder. Chapter 54. The twin headlights of the Peugeot picked out the low humps of a grass verge either side of a single-lane road that was riddled with potholes. Beyond the verges, she could see nothing but black. It was as if all that existed was this one winding road, taking them into an endless dark void. Charlotte's mind rattled through branches of possibilities. If she slammed on the brakes, would she be able to get out of the car before he rammed that knife into her neck? If she got out, did she stand a chance of outrunning him? If she screamed for help, was anyone going to hear her? Was compliance her only survival option? Should she let him do what he wanted to do and hope that being cooperative would buy her more time and the chance to escape? Was he going to kill her? Would he kill himself? Was that what he'd meant by making things right? Ewan, please, talk to me, she pleaded. Who is she? Who is Lottie? Ewan began to rock in his seat. "Let me tell her," he whispered. At least let me do that. Come on, she deserves." "What? No, please." "Oh, God help me. He's actually hearing her." She felt what little reserve of strength she had left sliding away. Madness like that, madness with voices, wasn't something that could be workshopped away, was it? It was hardwired, a broken brain misfiring. Ewan's lifelong achievement had been managing to contain it, to hide it, venting it through his art. "Shh, it's okay," tried Charlotte. "It's okay. Forget her, love. Listen to me instead. Ignore—" Ewan stamped one foot in the footwell and thumped his knee with his fist. I can't! He spun his head towards her. "You have no fucking idea! I can't just ignore!" Then he was shaking his head frantically. No! Charlotte leant away from him as far as she could. The hand holding the kitchen knife was flailing around dangerously close to her neck. I could crash. She could try that, spinning the wheel and hoping for the best, but she couldn't see what was beyond those grass humps. It was just a featureless black out there. Was it seawater, marsh, mud? Oh, God help me! Ewan's rocking and whimpering gradually subsided, and then he began nodding, as if he was listening to a phone call, some sort of pep talk down the line. "Okay," he said. "Okay, we're coming," he muttered. "Soon." Chapter 55. The skeleton crew of night shifters were beginning to clock on and settle in for the evening. They shot curious glances at Okaki and Warren, who were sitting at Okaki's desk. "Haven't you two got homes to go to?" said D.I. Abbott as he eased himself into his seat, setting his coffee and box of Krispy Kremes down on his desk. The phones on the CID floor rang, and Warren picked up the one on Okaki's desk. "Hastings CID. This is Control Room, Sussex Police. I'm PCRO Tammy Nelson. Are you the ones who put out the APW on the silver Peugeot 206? Okaki, who'd been leaning in to listen, snatched the phone from Warren. "Yes, this is DC Okaki speaking. What have you got for me?" "We had an ANPR hit on the vehicle from a static cam outside the Premier Off licence in Canberra about 20 minutes ago. It was heading eastwards out of Canberra." "Canberra?" Okaki looked at Warren and waggled a finger at his screen. He jumped onto a keyboard and pulled up the FCN, the ANPR fixed camera network. He typed in the location, and on Okaki's monitor, a local map appeared with a marker peg flashing red. "Thank you." She hung up and studied the map alongside Warren. "Zoom out," she ordered. He clicked on the scale slider and dragged it downwards. The map revealed more of the East Sussex coastline. "Boyd's just come back that way, hasn't he?" said Warren. Okaki traced the road into Canberra from the east. Lyd Road. It ran right up against the beach along Canberra Sands towards Jury's Gap. "They might have even passed each other," added Warren. She scrolled the map left. "Christ!" She pointed at the screen. "The Martello Tower isn't a million miles away." "Do you think this is linked to the case?" asked Warren. Boyd had Minter stop in a lay-by while they waited for more news. His sergeant pulled out a packet of polos and offered him one. "It'll help take your mind off things, boss." Boyd looked at him with barely veiled incredulity, but he took one all the same. "Jesus," he said, "we really try to put a wall up, don't we, between what we do for a living and who we are?" "It's us and them, boss." Boyd nodded. "Because we think of crime as what happens to them, not us." He shook his head. "Shit. And then something like this happens, and suddenly it's not just a job anymore." His phone buzzed in his hand. He hit answer and rattled out, "Okaki, what's the news?" "We've had an ANPR sighting of the silver Peugeot 206, registration Foxtrot Papa 79 Foxtrot Delta Victor on Lyd Road at Canberra. It's heading out to Jury's Gap." Minter immediately swung the car round out of the lay-by and back the way they'd come. This time he didn't ask. The lights and siren went on. "How long ago was this?" asked Boyd. "About half an hour." "Gav?" "Yes?" "Jones was caught before attempting to abduct and kill someone. He had a kill and dump kit, right?" "Well, the tower's that way," she said. "He's heading towards the Martello Tower." Pieces that he hadn't considered might conceivably be linked suddenly clattered into place, like ball bearings descending a marble run. Jones was roughly the same age as Ricky Harris, wasn't he? And hadn't Jones's Leeds record mentioned that he was born and raised in Kent? And Jones's paintings, not the pictures of the girl, but the endless painted landscapes of bleak marshes and moors. He remembered thinking they bore an uncanny resemblance to the forlorn wilderness around the tower. "Just a second." Boyd lowered his phone and called up his brief thread of messages with Sarah Shah. He tapped on the photo of Jones's room that showed the wall plastered with his charcoal and pastel drawings. He scaled it up and slowly scrolled along. The landscapes shared a similar theme: wetlands, marshlands, beaches with grass-crested dunes. The muted colours gave them a melancholic, vaguely foreboding tone. He stopped scrolling when he came across the one small portrait. Again he was struck by the aged-down picture of Charlotte. He hadn't scrolled beyond it previously, but this time continued looking. The image at the very edge of the photo was another marsh, painted in muddy colours, but the faint, smudged outline on the horizon was unmistakable. A tower. Boyd put the phone back to his ear. "Jones knows the tower," he said. "Fuck it, it's him. He's the one who's been dumping bodies there." "That was my thought," replied Okaki. "He could be our other DNA profile from Hensworth." "Okaki! Every unit that's close by! I'm on it!" She hung up. Chapter 56. The headlights had been picking out the sheen of tidal pools and mudflats for a while as the car snaked along a rutted gravel road. Finally, out of the solid darkness, Charlotte caught sight of something reflecting light back at them. It looked like the chevron pattern tape that police strung up around a crash site or a crime scene. For a moment, her hopes lifted. Where that tape was found, police were usually close by, right? Then amid the gloom, 20 yards beyond the tape, the headlights picked out a round brick tower. The gravel road ended there. "Stop the car," said Ewan. Charlotte did as he asked. He reached over, unlocked and pushed open the driver's side door. "Get out." She climbed out of the car, and he joined her, swiftly grabbing her wrist. Not that there was any way to escape. They were in the middle of nowhere. "Ewan, please, whatever." "Shut up," he snapped, pulling the police tape aside and dragging her after him. The Peugeot's headlights cast thick beams through skeins of swirling mist onto the tired old brickwork of the building. "What's in there?" she whimpered. He ignored her and led her towards an arched doorway. The tower looked like some old fortification that might once have housed early warning plane spotters during the war. She was dimly aware that her branches of opportunity were disappearing fast. She took a deep breath and tugged her arm hard to escape his grasp, almost pulling him off his feet in the process. Ewan responded by punching her in the face with the handle of the kitchen knife. "Fucking bitch!" he snarled as she dropped to her knees, stunned by the impact. He released his grip on her wrist and instead wound his fingers into her hair and grabbed the fistful. He began to yank her forward again, through the arched door and inside the building. She yelped with the pain. Nothing hurt more, nor commanded compliance more than the agony she was feeling from his grip right now. Still, she tried, squirming and dragging her feet, both her hands clasping his tightly, trying to ease the sharp tugging agony and peel his fingers clear of her hair. At last he let her go and shoved her roughly to the floor. "Down," he said. Initially, she thought he was telling her to stay lying. But then, by the light of the car's headlights spilling inside, she saw that she was beside an open trap door with a ladder leading down into complete darkness below. "You would know," she pleaded, aware through her broken voice that she had lost any hope of reasoning or negotiating her way out of whatever he had in store for her now. "Get down there!" he screamed, once again holding the tip of the knife to her throat. "Move!" She complied, slowly, swinging one leg and then the other over the lip of the trap door and onto the steps of the ladder. Feeling her way down, she descended until one foot tapped down onto a sheet of plywood. She looked around to see that the whole floor was a patchwork of plywood boards. Ewan came down quickly behind her, dropping the last few steps and thudding onto the floor. From far below, Charlotte could hear a soft splash of water as grit and flakes of rotten debris cascaded into a pool or a well. "Why?" she began. "Enough talking now," his voice growled in the darkness. "Not one more fucking word." She heard him fumble for something, then heard a soft click. A small key fob torch suddenly wiped away the pitch black, giving her a monochrome, almost dungeon-like context of dancing shadows and glistening wet stone. He pointed with his knife. "Go!" She turned to look where he was gesturing and saw a weathered wooden post beside the curved wall and steps leading down through the floor and out of sight. He shoved her. "Go!" Boyd had what 3 words open on his phone. He'd placed a peg to remember the tower's location the first time he'd gone out to it, and now his focus was on watching their location jitter painfully slowly across an almost featureless map towards it. A grim fairy tale for the smartphone generation. Knight, monster and maiden reduced to one blue dot and one red one. Minter had turned the sirens off. His headlights were on full beam, and he was driving foolishly fast along a winding, narrow gravel strip that offered little room for error. A corner too fast, and they'd be thrown into a tidal pool. Boyd tried to keep his attention on the dots, the distance between them narrowing slowly. That gap was all that mattered until they got there. Then he'd widened his field of thoughts to what the fuck next. "Their eyes," a snippet of Okaki's voice, "scraped out by the serrated blade of a Swiss." He shook his head, as if he could shake that thought out of it. Not Charlotte. God, please, not that for Charlotte. He'd had a moment when he'd queried whether he, or his job, might somehow bring the horror of real life to her front door, making her a lightning rod for disaster or danger. But her story had gate-crashed his. She'd come with her very own monster, a very patient one who'd been biding his time, hiding his fucked-up pathology for years behind a smokescreen of compliant parole hearings and harmless landscape drawings. "Ewan, please, talk to me." He'd dragged her down here, at knife point, to this sodden dungeon for what reason? She kept trying to reassure herself that the knife was his means of coercing her to this place, and no more. He'd smacked her with the handle. Her head was still ringing from the blow, but he hadn't stabbed her. Maybe there was a little hope left in that. He seemed to have run out of intent and purpose, and was now squatting on a pile of glistening, algae-covered bricks beside her, staring at the rippling water around them. She noticed scaffolding poles glinting in the darkness. They provided a glimmer of hope. This place wasn't some long-forgotten ruin, but a place that was actively being restored. Outside, there could conceivably be a cabin somewhere in the gloom, containing, she could only hope, a surly security guard resigned to spending a Scrooge-like Christmas alone. Weren't security guards meant to patrol every few hours to make a cursory inspection? Ewan, she tried again. Why are we down here? He stirred from his thoughts to look at her. This time the knife wasn't thrust in her face, but instead hung limply in his fist. She stopped, he said softly. She's not crying anymore. Charlotte knew better than to ask who she was again. Is this what Lottie wants? You down here? He shook his head. Not me. It's you, he replied. She wants you. She was afraid to ask, but he's talking again. I've got to keep him talking. Why does she want me, Ewan? His bottom lip suddenly curled, and his face crumpled. We killed her, he cried. We left her to die down here all alone. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. We? What happened, Ewan? Tell me, she whispered. We were just kids, he said, sobbing. Did you hurt someone? Asked Charlotte. Was there an accident down here? There was another boy, he replied. I didn't even really know him. His voice had changed in timbre to the whine of someone younger, a child. We just met on the beach. We were both bored. He said he knew a cool place. Was it this place? She prompted. Yes, Ewan sniffed. He'd said we should go and explore it. I didn't want to, but... Charlotte began to suspect where this tale that he was tiptoeing slowly towards was heading. Was Lottie here? Was she another child who was playing here? He nodded absently, one hand incessantly tugging at the bristles on his chin. It was only meant to be a game. There! Minter pointed ahead. Boyd looked up from his phone and out through the mud-spattered windscreen. Ahead of them, although it was hard to tell if the track was going to lead them straight there or meander some more, he could see the headlights of a stationary vehicle and the base of the tower caught in the glare of their headlights. Mercifully, the last leg of the track ran straight to the tower, and a few moments later Minter pulled up a dozen yards short of the Peugeot. Boyd reached for the torch in the drive as well, and they both jumped out. Careful, whispered Boyd. It could be armed. Gun-armed or knife-armed? Queried Minter. He was holding up a pair of stab vests pulled from the rear seat. It could be either. Boyd shrugged and held his hand out for one of the jackets. Call control and let them know we're here, he said, as he approached the Peugeot. It might be best to hold back, Minter began. No, he continued, shaking his head, because when have we ever done that? Boyd snapped on the torch. The silver Peugeot was empty. They were inside the tower then. He stepped past the tape and approached the arched doorway, grimacing at the noise behind him, the growl of the pool car's engine and the crackle and squawk of radio chatter. I need to bloody hear. There was no way Ewan Jones wouldn't have heard them arrive, and no way he wouldn't have registered the blue flickering lights coming from their car. So there was no point making a slow and stealthy approach. Charlotte's life could quite possibly be measured in seconds left. Boyd cupped his mouth as he stood in the doorway. Ewan Jones! This is the police! He leant in and panned his torch around. There was no one on the main floor. He crossed the floor, lay down and panned his torch through the trap door. There was nothing to be seen on the floor below either. Ewan Jones! He called. This time his voice boomed as it reverberated off the curved brick wall. This is the police! There was no bloody chance that he could have missed that. But still there was no response. He'd left Minter outside waiting for backup. There was only room for one foolish arse in here. But Charlotte had to be somewhere below, and doing nothing was not an option. He quickly clambered down the ladder and dropped heavily onto the floor. It creaked and groaned alarmingly beneath his weight. There was an unnerving give to the plywood sheets that covered the old planks beneath. In the centre of the floor was a large gap where the floor had caved in. Cautiously he made his way towards the outer curved brick wall and grabbed hold of the post that marked the top of the stairs. Even that wobbled uncertainly as he held on to it. He heard the sound of creaking wood and the soft clanking of the scaffolding poles that shored up the floor and stairs. "You and Jones!" he tried again. He pulled out his phone and held it in both hands as if it was a gun, an old trick from his uniform days. "Officer with a taser!" Nothing. "Charlotte, are you down there?" He thought he heard water sloshing gently, as if it had been disturbed by someone moving around. He took several steps down, placing his feet close to the wall to mitigate his weight on the old steps. He still wasn't entirely confident that the scaffolding was secure enough to be taken for granted. "Hello?" He couldn't see a thing, even now that his eyes had adapted to the full darkness. It was disconcerting. Above him he heard Minter's heavy footsteps clonking across the plywood-lined floor. "You okay down there, boss?" "Put the mini-gen on," Boyd called back. "The what?" "The generator. We need lights on down here." He heard Minter's heavy steps as he crossed the floor again, then the click of a switch. The generator whirred to life, and the floodlights on the floor above and down in the basement below winked on. Boyd winced in the intense glare. Sully had quite clearly emptied his department stock cupboard of 500-watt tripod lamps in an attempt to recreate the mothership scene in Close Encounters. It took him a few moments for him to take in what he was looking at. Chapter 57. The last time Boyd had been down here, the water had been lapping halfway up the stairs. Now it was well and truly down to the bottom, revealing an undulating mountainscape of fallen bricks, timber, and the remnants of Second World War crates, surrounded by a black sea of silt-thickened water. In the middle of this was Charlotte, cowering and covered in blood on the left side of her head and neck. It had soaked into her cream jumper and even down into the sodden corduroy skirt she was wearing. Beside her, Ewan Jones, squatting like a stone gargoyle, staring down into the gently sloshing water. He was holding a large kitchen knife. Boyd realized from the blue plastic handle that it was his kitchen knife. "Ewan," he called out, "drop the knife, mate." Jones slowly looked up at Boyd, as if he were nothing more than an annoying distraction. "The knife!" snapped Boyd. "Drop it!" "Where's she gone?" he replied plaintively. "Where's Lottie gone?" Lottie? Boyd could only suppose Jones was referring to one of the bodies. "We found her, mate," he said. "And the others. It's over." "She has to be here," Jones cried. "She was crying. He staggered off his perch and across into the brackish water. "She must be here somewhere." He waded into the water, dropping down to his neck as he fumbled the bottom with his hands. He was wandering further and further away from Charlotte. A little more, and maybe, if Boyd shouted at her to run, she'd be on the steps before Jones could wade back to her. "Where are you, Lottie?" Jones whimpered, as he continued his frantic ducking and wading. "I did what you wanted," he cried. "I brought her here." Minter had crept down the stairs. "Boss, we got an ARU on its way," he said softly from behind Boyd. Boyd nodded. "Good. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to talk him down." He looked at his sergeant. "We should taser the bastard first, though. You didn't happen to—" Minter shook his head. The armed response unit would undoubtedly have one, so it was just a case of keeping the crazy bastard occupied until they turned up. "Ewan, she's not down there anymore. We took her away," he paused, "so she can finally have a proper burial." Jones had waded across to the far side of the basement, panting with the effort and the cold. He rested against one of the construction support props that had been recently installed. It was bracketed to a pair of horizontal tension bars that reached out on either side to the bowing basement walls. A large metal square brace sat at the end of each arm, firmly pressed against the bricks, almost like a pair of broad splayed hands. A scaffolding rendition of Superman holding two crushing forces apart. "Ewan," said Boyd again, "it's over. There are police with firearms on the way. Let me come down and help you both get out of here." He took another couple of steps towards the bottom. "We can get you some proper help, Ewan," he added. "Not prison time, mate. I mean help, real help." Jones was clinging on to the support prop, panting out clouds of breath, reminding Boyd that the water had to be close to freezing. Charlotte so far had remained silent, clinging to the bricks she was sprawled upon. "Ewan," she uttered softly. He looked up from the swirls of dark water. "Ewan, it's okay, my love. It's okay." She managed to conjure a warm and caring smile across her bloodied face. "I can hear her now. I can hear Lottie." Jones's expression changed. You can hear her?" Charlotte nodded. "She's happy now. She's not crying." Boyd took advantage of the distraction to take the last few creaking steps down to the bottom and stood still, ankle deep in the water. "What's she saying, Charlotte? What's she saying?" Jones asked. "Careful," thought Boyd. "You can't possibly know what she sounds like in his head." Charlotte turned to look at Boyd, who was now wading across the treacherously uneven ground beneath the rippling surface. The look on her face said it all. "What do I say now?" "What's she saying?" shouted Jones impatiently. "She's saying it's all over now. She says thank you, Ewan. Thank you for bringing—" "Don't fucking lie!" Jones snapped, banging the pole with his fist. The kitchen blade clanged noisily off the metal and the sound echoed ominously around the basement. "She says it's okay. She knows you didn't mean to drown her." "Lying bitch! Do you think I'm stupid?" He slammed his fist into the pole again, but this time its base made a grating sound as it slid across something beneath the water. "She didn't fucking drown, you silly bitch!" Boyd saw it happen in slow motion, an almost predictable sequence of events that started with the bottom of the construction support pole sliding further off-center and then lurching away into deeper water as if it had been kicked out. The support beams, which had until now been perfectly horizontal like the arms of a crucifix, sagged downwards, and the wide square braces, lacking the tension that was holding them firmly in place, crashed down into the water. There was a held breath moment when it seemed as though nothing further was going to happen. Then, to the right, a brick clattered out of the wall into the water, followed by another and another. Boyd waded across to Charlotte, grabbed her hand and pulled her to her feet, just as the rest of that particular section of wall sagged inwards like melted wax and crashed into the water. A viscous bulge of sodden peat the size of a boulder spewed through the ragged hole like toothpaste out of a tube. Then behind it, gallons of muddy water cascaded in. Boyd and Charlotte scrambled through the chaos, back to the stairs and up onto them as the muddy avalanche consumed Jones where he stood. "Up, up, up!" yelled Boyd as he felt the stairs vibrate from the sudden impact of thick, muddy water smashing against the supporting scaffolding. Minter reached down, grabbed Charlotte's arm and pulled her up behind him. Boyd followed her in hot pursuit as he felt the scaffolding give way, then a moment later the steps themselves. He had just set foot on the top one when the entire structure collapsed beneath him, and he hurled himself up onto the plywood-covered floor. Even that felt unsafe, though. "Keep going!" He flapped his hands at Minter. "Get the fuck out!" Minter shoved Charlotte up the ladder first, then followed her up, Hefting her up and out with his shoulder, Boyd flew up the ladder behind them. As he pulled himself up through the trapdoor, the entire floor below collapsed into the swirling mire in the basement. As the floodlights and the generator descended along with the plywood boards and ancient timber into the depths, Boyd looked down and caught one last snapshot image of a vortex of glistening liquid piling in to fill the void. The three of them emerged from the arched doorway to see the twinkling headlights and flickering blues of a convoy of patrol cars weaving their way along the marshland's winding lane towards the tower. "They're like bloody London buses," Boyd panted. Chapter 58. Boyd watched over Charlotte as she woke up in stages over a period of 10 minutes. The stitches on the side of her temple ran back into a hairline, which had been shaved down to the skin to allow the doctor to close the wound. There was a kind of Frankenstein's monster look to it. A cool look if there'd been a Halloween party for them to head off to. "Hello there, sleepy chops," he said. Her left eye was completely bloodshot. Not pink, but a solid red mote that surrounded her pupil. The doctor had said it wasn't permanent. It would clear in due course, but for the moment it looked unsettling. "Hello, Bill," she whispered. "Oh, my head stings." She reached up towards the stitches, but Boyd intercepted her hand. "Be careful, you got a bit of an ouchie up there." She smiled. "I'm presuming that's not one of your forensic terms?" He laughed and took her hand. She glanced at a glass vase of flowers on the table beside her and frowned, puzzled. "They're from Emma," he explained. "She dropped them in earlier. You had one hell of a smack to the side of your head," he continued, "hence the stitches. Other than that, though, apart from some scrapes and bruising, you're fine." He smiled. "You're a tough old bird." "Charming," she replied. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. "What happened to—" Boyd shook his head. "He didn't make it." "Right," she said and nodded. "Right. Okay." "They pulled his body out a couple of hours ago," Boyd added. "He drowned." He tried to interpret the look on her face. "Do you need something for the pain?" he asked. She nodded and squeezed his hand. A tear rolled down her cheek. "It really hurts." "She's awake. The governor's talking to her," said Okaki, peering through the gap in the curtain that had been drawn around Charlotte's bed. Minter and Warren got up from the hospital's bucket chairs and joined her. "Just good friends, my arse," said Minter. "For fuck's sake," Okaki whispered. "Time and place." "It looks like he's told her Jones is dead," said Warren. He frowned. "Why is she crying?" Okaki looked at him. She shook her head with exasperation. Men, she mused, could be so moronically binary. The three of them watched in silence as Boyd gently held Charlotte in his arms. Okaki suddenly felt uneasy. They were watching something that Boyd was assuming was a private moment. "Enough," she said, grabbing Minter's and Warren's arms and herding them back to their seats. Then, "I heard from the DSAP that Boyd's off the case." Minter looked at her. "He told you that, not me?" "No, well, he didn't exactly tell me. I sort of overheard it," she confessed. "He was letting Boyd know that because of the personal connection he needed to step away from the case." "Did you happen to be who's going to be replacement SAO then?" She shook her head. "It'll probably be you, Minter, as his second. But don't let it go to your head. Don't be an arse about it. You're not getting a gov out of me," she said, grinning. "I suppose we'll find that out soon enough," said Minter. "As long as it's not that idiot Abbott," he added. "I shouldn't think it'd be him," Okaki replied. "I think Sutherland's hoping he'll get bored sleeping through his night shifts and take early retirement." She looked at Minter, "Which, of course, would leave a slot open for a new DI. Race you?" Minter laughed. "I got a good head start, Okaki, so why not? Game on." He looked at his watch. "Well, I think I'm going to head off home now. You need a lift? He asked Warren. Warren nodded. The two men pulled on their coats. "See you tomorrow then, Okaki," said Minta. She waved them off. Then a moment later, "Minta?" He paused. "What?" "You might want to bone up on the action log," she said. "If you want Sutherland to hand over SIO to you, best be prepared." He tapped his head. "Right. That's one conversation not to screw up, mate," she added. Chapter 59. Emma handed her dad a mug of tea. She sat down beside him on the sofa, and they both stared out of the bay window. "How's Charlotte doing?" she asked eventually. "She's okay. She's got stitches along her temple and up into her scalp. They've had to shave a bit away, so she's kind of sporting the Bride of Frankenstein look right now," he said, smiling. "Nice, Dad. Really nice. You know, really sympathetic." "She makes it look good," he said, adding, "The flowers were a nice idea, thank you." Her dad had told her the gist of things, that Charlotte had been staying over, not because of her central heating going on the futs, but because of Jones. She still couldn't get her head around the fact that an actual, real-life serial killer had broken into their home and snatched Charlotte. It made the place feel vaguely contaminated, as if he'd left the sulphurous smell of evil behind him. The other thing that she was struggling to make sense of was how Charlotte could have been married to a man who'd done what he'd done to those girls. How could a person be married to another and not know they were capable of something so vile and horrific? It was, she thought, like watching crime docs on the telly. You always asked yourself, how could the wife have not known? But maybe she did. Maybe she knew all along and chose not to acknowledge it. But Charlotte wasn't that kind of woman. Emma found herself starting to think that maybe Charlotte, and although she didn't think she'd ever admit this, her dad had had a point about Patrick. "Do you think this is going to change her, Dad?" "What do you mean?" "Well, from what you told me, she must have been pretty sure she was going to die, right? I mean, that kind of thing messes with your head, makes you reorder your priorities, doesn't it?" He sighed. "Didn't really change me that much, did it?" "Again," she sighed, "that's so sympathetic of you." She shook her head as he took another run at it. What she experienced was terrifying. But I hope there'll be something good that comes out of it for her. "Jesus, really, Dad?" Emma looked at him incredulously. "Ems, she spent God knows how many years looking over her shoulder for him, you know? She had no idea he was inside, and she'd been hiding all that time." She watched her dad as he ran a hand up Ozzy's back, ruffling his fur the wrong way. Oz grumbled for a moment and then rolled onto his back, legs splayed. "I hope," he continued, "I hope this will be a release for her." He shook his head. "You know, that's what didn't make sense to me about her." "What didn't?" "I think I may be wrong, but I think she's actually a very outgoing person, an extrovert, but—" "You think hiding changed her?" He nodded. "Exactly. Before that, the sheer bloody terror of being married to someone that bloody You can't say crazy, Dad. That's not actually a term these days." "Batshit crazy, then," he said defiantly. "I've heard you say that more than once." She laughed. "He can have that one." "That's going to knock corners off you, right?" he continued. "Nor at your confidence." He took a sip of his tea. "She was still a kid, really, when she first met him, and—" "Is this you clumsily segueing your way into discussing Patrick?" She'd been expecting this for a while, and was surprised to find she didn't mind as much as she thought she would. He raised a hand. "What? No, I wasn't—" "Okay," she said. "Well, we might as well get this conversation sorted out now. It's done, all right? We're no longer a thing. I don't even work the same shifts as him anymore. I asked to be flipped to mornings." "I wasn't—" She raised her hand. "I'm not done yet. I understand that I might have been a bit, I don't know, naive or whatever, but it's all good. Nothing really bad happened." She gave him a thankful nod. "Now let us not speak of it again, ever. Comprende?" Comprende. Ozzy rolled lazily off the couch and went to join Mia, who was sitting beside the fire and gazing wistfully at the flickering tongues of flame. "So when's Charlotte coming out?" Emma asked. "Tomorrow morning, as soon as the consultant signs off on her." "Is she going to stay here for a bit longer?" He looked at her. "Is that going to be a problem?" Emma shook her head. "Totally not a problem. She's all right. I like her. And I think someone else does too." "Good. No, I don't know. The offer's there if she needs a few more days with some company. I imagine the thought of going back to her place right now, being alone, that might be a bit unsettling." "Yep." He looked at her. "But you're sure you're okay?" Emma smiled. "She can stay as long as she wants. You need a Charlotte in your life." He frowned. "What the hell does that mean?" "Work it out, numbnuts." Chapter 60. It's Cardiff's answer to David Beckham," crowed DSI Sutherland. "Come on in and grab a seat." Minter closed the door behind him and sat down. "Hardly," he replied, beaming. "I just got given a business card is all, sir. I'm not sure if I'll even call the number." Sutherland grinned. "Well, don't forget your friends when you're rich and famous, eh?" He cleared his throat and assumed a more serious expression. "Now then, you know why you're here, Sergeant?" "Because DCI Boyd's off the case?" Sutherland nodded. "For obvious reasons. It's nothing he's done wrong, you understand, just, you know." Minter nodded. "There are personal connections." "Indeed. You're Boyd's second. I presume, despite gallivanting up and down hills and dales for your Lion Man competition and launching a modelling career, you're up to speed on this case?" Minter suppressed a smile. "Iron Man, sir. But yes, we got lucky with you and Jones." "You got very lucky. Fortunately, the press aren't sniffing around yet. I'm not sure what they'd make of the SIO's girlfriend suddenly becoming the latest victim of the very serial killer he's investigating." "The woman's just a friend of his, sir." Sutherland snorted. "Nevertheless, there's a personal connection, which is why I need you to stand in as acting SIO going forward." "Yes, sir." Minter sat up a little straighter. Sutherland scratched his head. "Anyway, I just want to make sure I'm up to speed myself. This tower relates to two different suspects, so we effectively have two lines of inquiries that may actually be linked." "Sort of, sir. We have 3 female victims, all dumped there, who we believe were all Jones's victims, starting with Chloe Hunter in 1999. Laura Kahn, potentially, who went missing in 2003, being the most recent. We're still trying to ID the third body, but she's almost certainly one of Jones's." "And there's this little girl, Hemsworth?" "Yes. She went missing in 1971, and it's likely that's when she died. We're almost certain Jones had something to do with her, despite being a minor at the time, and probably Harris, too." "Harris's DNA was in a lunchbox, wasn't it?" "In a lunchbox, sir. Harris's DNA is confirmed as being on the items found in it, which was in the same bag as Hemsworth's body. If we can identify Jones's DNA, we'll have a forensic link, putting them both in the same place at the same time as Hemsworth. And," he added, "there's also the suspicious activity regarding Harris's ownership of the tower itself." "In what way?" "Well, buying it in the first place, when he must have known there was nothing he can actually have done with it. Then aggressively holding on to it for 30 years. Maybe young Jones and young Harris were childhood friends. They encountered Hemsworth at the tower, and she somehow ended up murdered, mutilated, and dumped in that bag." Sutherland had the action log on the screen and pulled up both men's details. "Christ, they'd have been just boys when—" "Right, sir. Harris 13, Jones 11. Minter shook his head slowly. "It beggars belief, so it does." Sutherland scrolled through the notes on Ewan until he came across the photo of the art in his hostel room in Dover. "Good God, those drawings of his, they're quite bleak, aren't they, sir?" Sutherland curled his lips. If there was an award for gloomiest landscape exhibition, the same themes go all the way back to the 80s, when he was on the brink of becoming successful. They're all of marshes, towers, deep wells, dark colours, dark moods. And then there's the girl he kept drawing. Minter got up and leant over the desk. Do you mind if I show you something, sir? Be my guest. Minter walked around to Sutherland's side of the desk and clicked through the action log until a photo of a young girl appeared on the screen. Patricia S. Hemsworth. This was the image from the Miss Purr file. He then clicked on one of Ewan's paintings from the 80s and lined it up alongside the portrait from his hostel room. Good grief, said Sutherland. He's been painting Hemsworth all along. Minter nodded. That's what we think. The other victims, Chloe Hunter, Laura Kahn, if we can confirm her, and the woman who escaped him back in 2008, also bear a passing resemblance to Hemsworth. Minter pulled their pictures up. Sutherland nodded slowly as he took them in one at a time. Yes, I see. There's definitely a certain look to all of them. We think that whatever happened back in 71 with Jones and Harris imprinted on Jones's psyche. He was only a boy then. Perhaps he was trying to relive or atone for that moment in his youth over and over. And what about Harris? Do you think Harris had anything to do with the later victims? Minter shrugged. It's possible, but we have no corroborating evidence. He sucked in a deep breath and let it out slowly. The best we can pin on him at this stage is a possible involvement in Hemsworth's death. He pulled a face. What? Well, that hangs on the lunchbox DNA, doesn't it? He could argue that he met Jones earlier that day, shared a bit of his lunch with him, then went off on his merry way. And you're interviewing him when? This afternoon. We're just waiting on LSE to give us the full results on the third body and DNA swabs. We've retained him on joint enterprise for Hemsworth's murder, but who knows? We might have him for the others too. Chapter 61. Okaki watched Minter emerge from the Piers Cafe with a plastic tray. She dropped her cigarette butt and towed out the ember, kicking it through a gap in the planking and down into the frothing sea below. Minter set the tray down on the table. No fish finger sandwiches today? I got you a chicken wrap instead. Crap, she sighed. I wanted something hot. Minter sat down. The coffee's hot. She peeled the lid off and blew on it. So what's the strategy with Harris this afternoon, then? He raised a brow. So what's the strategy with Harris this afternoon, then? He repeated her question and looked at her expectantly. She shook her head. Nuh-uh. I'm not saying it. Minter relented. Well, while we're waiting on the DNA swabs from the later victims, I think we double down on his involvement with Patricia Hemsworth's death. We'll tell him we can get him on joint enterprise, unless he can give us a credible account that excuses him. Which we can't, she replied. It's just he said, she said. Plus it was 50-something years ago. Well, we'll let him think we can, replied Minter. Maybe he'll open up and tell us what happened in 1971. Or a version of. She sipped her coffee. You know, we can't mention anything about the later victims until we hear from LSE, right? Or the eye-gouging thing. Minter looked up. Yes, I know all that, thanks, Detective Constable. I'm just checking. She picked up her wrap and looked at it with little enthusiasm. Truth is, though, I reckon it was Jones who led whatever happened that day. I mean, the same MO years later, when Harris was already stuck on that island, and I was picking through the evidence taken from Jones's room. He was seriously fucked up. She set the wrap back down. Have you read his notebooks? Not yet. Jesus, Okaki, where'd you find the spare hours in a day to do this stuff? She smiled sweetly and carried on. He was convinced that Hemsworth was commanding him to bring her a body so that she could, I don't know how, possess it and live again. He was completely convinced that if he dragged someone down into the tower, Patricia would rise from the depths and all would finally be forgiven. Well, that's artist's view, isn't it? How do you even get that batshit crazy, though? Minter shrugged. Let's also make sure we keep all that from Harris, too. If he gets wind about any of the crazy stuff, he'll use that to blame everything on Jones. You think, boss? She said, rolling her eyes. He smiled. See? That didn't hurt so much, did it? Oh, piss off. She huffed and took a swig of her coffee. So is Sally done with the tower now? I should think so. Or what's left of it, anyway. I'm not setting foot anywhere near it now. It's a bloody death trap, I'm telling you. Minter took a bite of his pasty. We're going to hand the tower back to Knight and Arnold to finish the renovation. The sooner it's officially out of our possession, the better. I think the whole thing's going to tumble down at any moment. Okaki nodded. What time's the interview room booked for? Minter checked his watch. 3. She got up and grabbed her coffee. You going? He asked, mouth full. I might check in on Boyd, see how Charlotte's doing, she said. Not to his house, you're not. It's nearly 2 now. We need to war game the interview. You're spitting crumbs, she replied. Relax. I'm just going to call him. She headed down the pier, then stopped and turned around. You should probably get Warren out with those release forms. Huh? Before the tower collapses? She was right. He nodded. My desk, no later than 2:30. I want a war game, I know. He watched her go and shook his head. Okaki was a bleeding nightmare to line manage, and so infuriatingly right all the time. He honestly had no idea how Boyd coped with her. Present in the room are DS Stephen Minter, DC Samantha Okaki, interviewee Richard Harris, and his solicitor, Jason Pinner. So where are the other 2? Asked Harris. Batman and Boy Wonder. They're on other duties, Minter replied. That makes you 2 the B team or something, then? He turned to Pinner. I'm not sure I'm happy about that. Minter ignored him, shuffled his notes, then set them down. Ricky Harris, we have you at the scene of Patricia Hemsworth murder, July the 27th, 1971, at the Martello Tower known as Devil's Tower. We have DNA evidence that puts you there on that particular day. We also have your purchase of that same Martello Tower, then holding on to it for 30-plus years. In addition, we have conflicting statements that Stephen Knight made several decent offers to buy the tower over the past 30 years, but you claim that they were, in your own words, shitty little offers. Would you like to take this opportunity to explain any of that to us today? Harris leant forward. No comment. Okay. Minter pulled a printed chart from his notes. So, a lunchbox was found with Patricia Hemsworth's body. A lunchbox that contained a preserved apple core. What do we have found on it are traces of DNA that match your profile, along with another DNA profile. So, it's evident that you and one other person were present in the tower with Patricia Hemsworth. Do you know who that other person was? Pinner leant in towards Harris and whispered something. Harris nodded. The solicitor raised a hand. Can we suspend this interview? I need a private moment with my client. Already? Please, if you don't mind. Minter shrugged. Interview suspended at 3:05 p.m. He paused the recording machine and got up. You got 15 minutes. Outside the interview room, with the door clicked shut, Okaki finally spoke. That sounds hopeful. Maybe he thought about it and realized he's got someone else to blame it on, Minter said. Which means we'll probably get a load of complete bollocks out of him, she replied. Anything's better than no comment. She tutted, but nodded. Maybe. They waited in silence for a while. Then, suddenly, Minter shucked out a laugh. What? Batman and the Boy Wonder, he said, smiling. That's a classic. She nodded. Boy Wonder? Oh, Warren's going to love that, not. There was a knock on the door from the inside, and Jason Pinner's face appeared. We're ready to continue. All right, then, began Minter. He unpaused the machine. Interview resumed at 3:12 p.m. Mr. Harris, your solicitor has just informed us that you now intend to explain how your DNA was found at the scene of Patricia Hemsworth's murder. Lottie, Harris said. Sorry? She said her name was Lottie. Minter frowned at Okaki. She looked up from her notes. Scarlett, she said. Her middle name was Scarlett. Chapter 62. Bloody hell, this is incredible, muttered Ewan. His voice echoed around the cavernous interior of the tower. Ricky nodded. It's like Dungeons and Dragons down here, mate. There's like vaults and caves right at the bottom, he said, pointing down the ragged hole in the floor. And don't forget the human sacrifices. Little girls were... Who's there? The two boys jumped out of their skins, then looked at each other, eyes bulging with a rush of adrenaline. The voice was female, a girl. It had a sing-song quality to it, as its reverberation bounced around the brick walls from somewhere above. Is someone else down there? A wooden board creaked above them. Dust and grit fell through the gaps and clattered a moment later into the water far below. A torch shone down the ladder and lit up the damp brick wall. Who's that? Called up Ewan. I'm Lottie, she replied. Who are you? My name's Ewan. The torch beam fell onto him. He pointed at his tall new friend. This is Ricky. We're exploring Devil's Tower. Lottie came down the creaking ladder carefully, holding the wooden rungs as she descended. Me too, she said, as she finally approached them. I'm from Peckham, she said. That's in London, by the way. I'm on holiday, said Ewan. Are you staying at the campsite? Lottie nodded and smiled, suddenly recognizing him. Oh, hold on. I've seen you on them climbing frames. You're that posh boy, aren't you? She gave him a furtive smile, then aimed her torch at Ricky. Who's this ugly mug? Bog off, Ricky replied. She laughed at him. Bog off? Are you simple or something? Harris blinked and forced himself to return to the version of events that he'd been telling the coppers. So this girl and Ewan, you're saying they took an instant dislike to each other? Minter asked. Harris nodded. She took the piss out of him, and I could tell he wanted to smack her one. So what happened next? Asked Minter. I told everyone to chill, then we played for a bit. You know, dare games, arsing about, that kind of thing. And then finally, Harris shook his head. Man, it was so long ago. Try your best, said Minter. Whatever you can remember. Well, continued Harris, if I remember, we got separated somehow. We were playing hide and seek, I think. The other boy, Ewan, was with the girl, and I was on my own. Where's Ewan, do you think? Asked Lottie. He's never going to find us. Ricky grinned. He got bored, I guess. It's just you and me now. They were hiding beneath the wooden steps that curved around the wall above them. With the torch off, it was almost completely dark, with just the faintest glimmer of daylight leaking down. Ricky realized he really wanted to touch her. He noticed that Lottie had started growing titties, despite being so small. He just wanted a little touch, that's all. The darkness and the fact that they seemed to be alone emboldened him. He reached across and grabbed her chest, curious to see what a girl's breast felt like. Hey! She yelped and slapped his hand away. Oh, come on, he said, just a little feel. Piss off, she said, standing up and emerging from beneath the steps. Perv? Ricky emerged too. Come on, Lottie, I was just having a laugh. No, you weren't. You're like a dirty perv. It was just a little titty squeeze. What's your problem? Are you a les or something? She bent down, scooped up a handful of mud, and flung it at him. It splattered across his shirt. Ha, 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 now you're a proper dirty perv. She bent down again to scoop up some more, but Ricky stepped forward and grabbed her wrist. Right, just for that? He wrestled her into an armlock, hands bent behind her back, and held both her wrists in one of his big hands. "Get off me, you pissing weirdo!" With his free hand, he had free rein. And that's when she started screaming. "So you heard her screaming?" Okaki asked him. "And you did what?" "I came running down from the top of the tower, didn't I?" Harris lied. "She was screaming something about you and feeling her up, and he was chasing after her. I mean, I had no choice, man. I came running down to save her." "And what did you find?" "They were on these wooden steps that go right down to the very bottom. The other lad, Ewan, had her pants in one of his hands and was holding onto her ankle. The girl was crying, I mean really crying and screaming, and—" "What are you doing?" shouted Ewan. Ricky looked up. He thought the boy had got bored and buggered off. The little bitch had managed to get free, but he'd caught up with her halfway up the stairs. He'd just grabbed hold of her again, and now Mummy's boy was back. "We were just snogging," said Ricky. "Then suddenly she started screaming." "Help me!" Lottie screamed again. "He's hurting me, please!" Ewan took several steps down. "Let her go, for God's sake!" Ricky lay on top of her, pushing her against the steps to prevent her squirming. He then pinched her nose. She opened her mouth to scream again, so he shoved her pants in to shut her up. "Quiet!" he snarled, holding his palm over her stuffed mouth. He looked up at Ewan. "Come on, mate, give me a hand." "No!" Ewan looked horrified. "No! Jesus, Ricky, let her go!" He shook his head. "She'll tell, right? She'll go to the police or something, and we'll both get it." Ewan shook his head. "You let her go right now, or what? I'll—" Ricky chuckled. "Come on. You can have a little feel too while I'm holding her if you like. Then it's my turn again." Ewan looked like a rabbit in the headlights. Ricky could tell he wanted to help her, but he was just too chicken. "You just going to sit there and watch, are you?" said Ricky, grinning wildly now. This was fun in a way he hadn't ever realized was possible. Catch, wrestle, and sex. A new game. Kiss and chase, but just taken to the next level. Lottie's screaming was still fairly loud, even though it was muted by her underwear and his palm. "What's it going to be, Ewan? You playing or not?" "This is wrong, Ricky. Let her go," Ewan mumbled. "What? You a bender or something?" "Let her go," he repeated more confidently this time. "You're bloody hurting her." But a part of Ricky's mind was already telling him that Lottie couldn't be allowed to go anywhere, that there'd be no telling tales or going to the police, that Lottie from London was going to have to vanish. "If you don't give me a hand, I'll just tell the police it was you did it." Harris's account of events had finally ground to a halt. He was sobbing, or pretending to, into his cupped hands. Okaki leant forward, impatient with his tears. "So, you and Jones? What, you're saying he actually assaulted her?" Harris wiped his face and shook his head. "It's so long ago, you know. It's all jumbled." "Just tell it how you remember it," said Minter calmly. Look, I was scared. I should have stepped in sooner," whispered Harris. I could have saved her. I know I could, but..." "But what?" Harris slid down in his chair and buried his face in his hands once again. Pinner interceded. "Can't you see my client's distressed?" "Come on, Ricky," said Minter. "This is your chance to get things off your chest, to tell us what really happened." "She fought him off," said Harris. "That brave little girl managed to get him off." He began to cry again. "My client needs a break." Okaki held a hand up to shush him. "Harris, what happened?" "Ewan pushed her," he whispered. "She fell off the steps, down to the bottom." Chapter 63. Warren checked the sat-nav on the dashboard, then looked out through the windscreen at the home in front of him. "Bloody hell," he muttered. It was a large, alpine, chalet-styled building, with green storm shutters, for effect obviously, flanking each window, and a darkly stained wooden facade along the front, giving the impression that it had been built from freshly cut and treated pine lumber. It sat in the middle of a large square lawn at the end of a vanilla-coloured paved driveway. There were Christmas lights strung across the front, and all the place needed was several tons of fake snow dumped onto it to transport it from the drab, grey, overcast Sussex countryside to some exclusive ski resort. He grabbed the folder off the passenger seat and climbed out of the pool car. He patted his hair down, straightened his tie and cleared his throat so that his voice sounded a little deeper. Then he stepped up to the porch and rang the doorbell. He was about to ring it again when he heard a chain slide on the inside and the door opened. "Mr. Knight," said Warren. Stephen Knight took a moment to place him. "Ah, it's P.C. Plod," he said. "No, I'm D.C. Warren," he corrected. "Do you mind if I have a quick word, sir?" Knight shrugged and backed up to let him in. Warren stepped into the large foyer as Knight closed the door behind him. "What can I help you with there, son?" he asked. Warren brandished the folder. "I have a form for you to sign. It's a release form for the tower. We're done with it now, and you can get your workmen back in." Knight smiled. "It's about bloody time. Let me get my glasses." He gestured for Warren to take a seat in the lounge. "Go and sit down, young man. I'll be with you in a moment." Warren watched Knight disappear up a grand set of stairs. "Bloody hell," he muttered again as he stepped into the lounge. Thick, roughly cut pine beams ran across the ceiling. A white, shaggy carpet covered the floor, and on the wall at the end, a large TV mounted above a fireplace was showing The Chase, the volume muted. Along the walls were items of historical weaponry, muskets, sabres, and an armoured breastplate, each with a spotlight artfully uplighting them. He could hear music playing somewhere else in the house. It sounded like a military marching band, all pomp and oompa-oompa brass and kettle drums. He wandered over towards the fireplace, which was crackling away with several logs piled high. To be honest, if Bradley Walsh's face hadn't been glowing down at him from the giant TV, he'd have thought it a classy place. "I found her down in the water at the bottom," said Harris. "Dead?" asked Minter. He shook his head, lips pressed firmly together. "Dying?" Harris nodded. Minter was struggling to tell whether Harris was putting on the tears and snot. From his experience as a copper, it was only possible with the benefit of hindsight. All those retired detectives who gave it the old, "I knew those were crocodile tears," were talking shite. Harris wiped his nose again and let out another long, "I'm pulling myself together" breath. "I could have run for help, but I panicked. I just ran." "You left Patricia Hemsworth dying?" asked Okaki. She wasn't doing such a good job of keeping her voice level and neutral. Minter cut back in before she decided to lean across the desk and break his nose. "You left her to die, alone in the dark?" he said. Harris nodded. "Jesus, I was scared. I panicked. That day has haunted me." Minter clenched his teeth. "If he starts crying again, I swear." Harris's chin started to wobble. "But there was nothing I could do." "You and Ewan both vacated the tower at that point?" Harris nodded. "Ewan was long gone. I never saw him again." "So what happened then?" Harris sipped his cup of water. "I went back home." "And you didn't bloody well tell anyone?" snapped Okaki. Minter was tempted to step on her toe under the table, but from the look on her face she'd probably kick him right back. "Look, I'm going to have to insist my client has a recovery break," said Pinner. "He's clearly distressed. This is totally unacceptable." Minter sat back. "Fine, all right. Interview suspended for half an hour at..." He checked his watch. 4:47 p.m. They watched as Harris was escorted out of the small interview room and waited until his solicitor pulled the door shut. "What do you make of that?" asked Minter. "That Jones tried to molest her, Harris tried to defend her, then she was pushed and fell." Okaki pulled a dismissive face. "It could just as easily have been the other way round, you know? With Jones dead, we only have Harris's version. The question we need to ask Harris when he's finished crying like a baby is, which one of those little bastards came back later, fucking mutilated the poor little girl and stuffed her into a bag?" "No prizes for guessing what the answer'll be," Minter muttered. Chapter 64. "The consultant won't be much longer," said Boyd. "Then I'll get you home." Charlotte was already dressed and sitting on her bed. "Oh, I hate hospitals. Honestly, I feel good enough to just get up and go." He smiled. She was sounding more like her usual self this afternoon. It had quite possibly been the lunch offering of watery curry on a bed of rice and greyish broccoli that had spurred her enthusiasm to get out. He checked his phone to see whether there were any messages from Minter or Okaki. They'd said that they were interviewing Harris again this afternoon. They were probably well and truly stuck into it by now. The consultant finally turned up. After a quick inspection of the stitchwork under the dressing, he declared Charlotte fit enough to leave, and she gladly led the way out of the ward, exiting Conquest Hospital at a pace and climbing thankfully into Boyd's capture. "Right, Parker," she said in a surprisingly good Lady Penelope voice. "Take me home." Boyd smiled. "Right you are." "Wait," she looked at him. "Can we take a walk along the beach first?" "You sure you're up to it?" He nodded at the window. It was dark already. "It's getting late." She nodded. "I really could do with some fresh air, Bill. And just a little normality." "All right." He put the car into gear, pulled out of the hospital car park and onto Little Ridge Avenue to head down to the front. Chapter 65. Oh, he'd heard everything. Those two boys and the girl were standing right above him, their raised voices booming and filling the entire cavernous interior of Devil's Tower. He'd heard the scuffle and the girl's shrill scream as she plummeted from the stairs, then the splash as she'd landed in the water only a few yards away from him. The two boys had scrambled in different directions. One ran away, the other had raced down the creaking stairs to find this Lottie, gasping and wheezing as she lay impaled on a jagged shard of wood. He had lingered for a few minutes, whimpering tearfully, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Then he'd backed away, scrambled up the stairs, and a moment later was gone from the tower. There was only the dying girl with him now, whimpering in the dark, distressed. Another chance to play with his new penknife. "Interview resumed. The time is 5:37 p.m, began Okaki. "Present are D.S. Minter, D.C. Okaki, interviewee Ricky Harris, and his solicitor Jason Pinner." She looked at Harris. "Better now?" she asked sarcastically. He nodded. "Yeah, thanks." "Right. Well, before the interview was suspended, you told us that both of you had found Patricia Hemsworth at the bottom. You said she was still alive." "I said dying," he replied. "There was no doubt about it." "And that's when you left her there?" "Steady there, Sam," Okaki reminded herself. Oh, she so wanted to grab that skanky beard of Harris's and slam his face down onto the table. She repeated her earlier question. "You left her to die, alone in the dark?" He nodded. "Jesus, I've told you already." His chin started to wobble again. "Why'd you keep making me go over it?" She glanced at Minter, and he nodded subtly. "Let's go for it." "So, which one of you two went back to the tower? All the way down to the bottom? so that you could mutilate her body and then stuff it into the holdall. Ricky Harris's face froze. Curiosity drew him away from his souvenir hunting expedition. He often came down to the lowest level, where the marsh water was seeping in, gradually edging its way upwards and covering the fallen debris of decades and centuries past. Curiosity drew him out of the storage bunker he'd been sloshing around in, looking for coins, brass percussion caps, or uniform badges. Curiosity compelled him to cross the uneven floor of the basement to the dying girl. He snapped his torch on as he stood over her. In its stark glare, her skin looked almost ghostly white, the blood bubbling out of her mouth an incredibly vibrant crimson. One of her arms twitched and spasmed as she struggled for breath on the wooden shard, like the gull on the beach earlier this morning. Well, she was going to die anyway. The boy pulled out his penknife. Warren was admiring one of the muskets on the wall when Knight returned to the lounge with his reading glasses and 2 glasses of whiskey. He joined Warren, both of them standing there, studying the long-barreled gun resting on its display plinth. Ah, yes, the Brown Bess musket, model 1810, used by the British Army. This one was fired at the Battle of Waterloo, you know. Incredible little bit of history right there. A seasonal warmer, young man? Knight asked, handing Warren a whiskey. Warren could smell from his breath that Knight had already had 1 or 2. I really can't, Mr. Knight. I'm still on duty. Warren took the glass, though not sure where exactly he could set it down. Knight gently placed his tumbler on the display plinth and lifted the musket. The men in the line regiments were expected to load and fire 3 rounds a minute in battle. During the struggle for Quatre Bras, some of the soldiers there recounted firing over 120 times, you know. Oh, right, Warren said, not exactly sure how to respond. Knight held the gun out to Warren. Want to have a hold, lad? Warren did. He set his tumbler down beside Knight's and took the weapon from him. Whoa, it's heavy, Knight chuckled. And the recoil was horrendous. There were riflemen whose shoulders were dislocated or whose collarbones were actually fractured by it. Warren squinted and aimed down the long iron barrel with the bayonet fixed at the end. He was already struggling to keep the heavy thing level. The problem with muskets in general, though, continued Knight, was the build-up of discharge powder around the flintlock mechanism. Bloody thing could get clogged. He reached out and took the weapon from Warren. In the middle of the fight, the soldiers would often have to clean it out with the tip of their bayonet or a stick or... Knight patted his pockets, reached in and pulled out a jangling set of house keys. Dangling from it was a penknife. He grabbed the knife and unfolded a short, serrated blade. Warren felt something jolt inside him, almost as if he'd rested his hand on an electrified cattle fence. You all right there, lad? Asked Knight. Is that a Swiss Army knife? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Knight looked down at it. Yes, well spotted, son. It's a Model 70. They changed the handle from red to white. For that one only, said Warren slowly. Knight was positively beaming, rather impressed with the young man's knowledge. That's right. They didn't sell very well and decided to switch back to the red. It was the first ever model to have the serrated blade, Warren said, absently backing away a step. Knight grinned. Well, well, you know your stuff, son. Warren was vaguely aware that he should probably shut up now. He was mentally racing through his internal action log and all the fragments of information he'd consciously and unconsciously dumped there. Knight was the right age to have been a teenager in 1971. He'd grown up in the area, a boy with local knowledge. He'd been trying, according to Harris and indeed Knight himself, to get his hands on that tower for nearly 30 years. Shit, and shit again. The smile that had been plastered across Knight's rosy-cheeked face was slowly fading. His watery grey eyes locked firmly onto Warren's. "Mr. Knight, may I ask you how long have you had that penknife?" Warren said, as neutrally and as calmly as he could manage. Knight's left cheek ticked ever so slightly. He smiled again, but this one was tight and strayed no further than the white bristles of his goatee. "I think it's time you headed back off to Hastings, lad, don't you?" Knight's fists were tightening around the musket as he lowered the wooden butt and raised the business end. "Rush hour traffic's a bit of a bugger, and you don't want to—" Warren cleared his throat and said formally, "Stephen Knight, you do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defense." With a flick of his wrist, Knight twisted the bayonet off the end of the musket and let the antique firearm clump heavily onto the thick white carpet. He lunged suddenly with unexpected agility, the 18-inch blade flicking across the space between them in a blur. Warren staggered backwards, losing his footing in the ridiculously dense carpet and landing on his back. The old man advanced and loomed over him, the bayonet raised above his head, ready for a downward plunge that was almost certainly going to prove fatal. Warren raised both hands to try to catch Knight's fist rather than the blade, and managed to catch hold of it with the tip of the blade just probing the knot of his tie. The old man's face was crimson with rage and exertion as he put his body weight behind the task of pushing the bayonet down and into Warren's trembling Adam's apple. Warren was dimly aware that he was losing this fight, that the tip of the bayonet was embedded in the knot of his tie and was highly unlikely to slide off target. The only thing stopping it riding all the way through his gristle and bone and into the carpet beneath was the waning strength he had in his forearms. Knight was hissing spittle out from between his stretched lips with the effort of finishing the work, jerking the weight of his whole body in an attempt to add that extra needed momentum to push the blade home. And all Warren could think was to plead, "No, no, 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 no!" He could feel Knight's hot breath, the saliva dribbling onto his knuckles. The man's hissing face was so close. I'm dead in seconds if I do fuck all." He let go of Knight's fist with his left hand, extended his index finger, and jabbed it hard into the man's bulging right eye. The effect was instant. Knight screamed and lost his hard-fought momentum, giving Warren the time to ball his left hand into a fist and swing a blow to the man's right temple. Knight, knocked senseless, lost his grip on the bayonet, and rolled off Warren like a dislodged beanbag. Chapter 66. Minter uploaded the interview recording into the directory allocated to the action log. He'd get one of these civilian LIOs on the floor below to transcribe it tomorrow, if there were any available, that was. For now, though, he had to start thinking about how to proceed with Ricky Harris. At best, they had a historical manslaughter charge the CPS would probably wimp out on and downgrade it to gross negligence manslaughter. Harris would undoubtedly walk free. They'd had 2 extension periods granted already in a bid to keep Harris in custody, but given the content of this interview, and that Harris had provided an explanation for the presence of his DNA, he doubted they'd be able to keep him locked up. Minter's phone buzzed on his desk. It was Warren calling. The idiot was probably lost somewhere in the Romney marshes, following a sat-nav arrow along some middle-of-nowhere dirt track. He let out a sigh and picked up the call. At least he'd get a chance to try out Warren's new nickname. "What's the story, boy wonder?" It's Warren, he gasped. What's the matter, boyo? You've broken down somewhere? It's DC Warren, he gasped again. I've just made an arrest. I think... You think you've made an arrest? Or you've actually made an arrest? Minter asked, grinning to himself. I'm not sure if I worded the caution right, but... Warren, Minter cut in. Who the hell have you just arrested? Stephen Knight, he wheezed. What the? Minter spluttered. You're only supposed to get him to sign the bloody release. He's our man, Warren rasped. He's the killer. I've got him down on the ground. I've cautioned him. He's fucking struggling. Minter heard Warren shouting to hold the fuck still. Then he came back on the phone. Minter, I need some uniforms over here right now. For a moment, Warren sounded like a regular Hollywood alpha, an Arnold bloody Schwarzenegger. Please, sir, he whimpered to Minter, completely ruining the illusion. I need some help. Chapter 67. Boyd pulled the beanie out of his donkey jacket pocket and gently pulled it onto Charlotte's head. He eased it gently over the shaved part of her scalp, covering the dressing. There, he said, stepping back to admire his handiwork. You look less like a patchwork plushie. We don't want to frighten the kids, eh? She smiled as she adjusted the woolly hat on her head. Thank you, Bill. Combined with her duffel coat, it made her look 30 years younger. At a glance, she could have passed for a student on her way down to the old town to meet her hipster friends in one of the ironically trendy bars along George Street. They walked from George Street through Market Passage and a few moments later emerged from Cutter Lane to look out across the seafront. It had just gone 6 in the evening. Usually at this time during the winter months, it would have been quiet here. But it was well into December. Lights had been strung across the road, and it seemed as though a significant portion of Hastings' denizens had suddenly woken up to the fact that there weren't that many shopping days left until Christmas. They crossed the road and walked along the promenade past Pelham Arcade. The crazy golf was still busy, with hardy fools playing pitch and putt in the freezing cold. They ambled past the paddleboat pond and finally onto the shingle beach. It was pitch black out there. Boyd could hear the waves tumbling onto the beach and hissing as they withdrew. You know, I still can't recall what happened, said Charlotte. The last bit I can remember was Ewan coming at me. She took in a deep breath and let it out slowly. Anyway, it's over now, isn't it? She said. The hiding? Boyd asked. She nodded. And the waiting? I always thought... No, I always knew he'd find me again. She sighed. The strange thing is, I don't know how I feel about him now. You don't have to feel anything for him, Boyd said. He was dangerous, violent, disturbed, tormented, she said. I think he was tormented. I think he did something terrible to Lottie when he was young. Something to do with the case you've been working on. Possibly, Boyd agreed. It's ongoing, though, so I can't, you know. She nodded. Guilt, she began, then stopped. What? Guilt can drive you mad. It can push you over the edge, can't it? He adjusted his scarf and cinched it more tightly beneath his chin. Sounds as though you feel sorry for him. She nodded. I suppose I do. Now that I'm not utterly terrified of him. Well, as you said, it's over. You can get on with your life again. He winced at how glib that sounded coming from him. Bill? He looked down at her. Yep. I need to go home. He nodded. Yeah, it's pretty bloody nippy, huh? Do you fancy grabbing some chips and heading back to... No, I mean my home, she said. I need to do that. She rested a hand on his shoulder. I've worked so hard to rebuild myself. I know it's no Victorian mansion, but it's my space. It's me. Does that make sense? Sure, he said, feeling his good mood deflate. Actually, that makes total sense. But thank you for having me. for looking after me. I could never tell you how much it means." "That's what friends are for, right?" he said flatly. The first large drops of rain began to fall from the dark sky. It never snowed at Christmas time in the UK, he reflected. It just pissed down with freezing cold rain. "Better head back," he said. They turned and walked up the promenade. As they cut back through onto George Street, to the sounds of music spilling from the trendy vodka bar opposite the pump house, Boyd's phone buzzed in his coat pocket. He pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was Minter. Boyd sighed. "Bloody work. Even when I'm off, I'm on. You don't mind if I—" "You take it," she said, and squeezed his hand. He tapped the screen. "Boyd," he said, sighing into his phone. "What's new, Minter?" Chapter 68. The rain was heavy that night. It poured down onto the south coast of England like a tropical monsoon, albeit a freezing cold one. The news the next day would be full of stories of flooded riverbanks, ruined homes that had been carelessly built on floodplains, drivers caught out in deeper-than-they-thought road puddles, and trains that had to be cancelled due to waterlogged tracks. The collapse of an old brick tower that dated back to Napoleonic times would headline only the local news. The gusting winds and the surging level of rainwater had finished it off at last. If you'd have been there in the early hours of the morning, you might have heard it go. The walls beneath the earth finally giving way under the pressure from outside. The tower above toppling sideways into the marshland. The crack of ancient oak timbers snapping. The clatter and splash of bricks as they cascaded into the mud and silt. And amid all that noise, you might have heard something that sounded not unlike a scream of anguish, not unlike a girl's voice, crying with righteous rage at a life cut brutally, unfairly short. The end. This has been The Safe Place, a haunting British crime thriller, DCI Boyd Crime Series, Book 5. Written by Alex Scarrow, narrated by Aubrey Parsons. Copyright 2022 by Alex Scarrow. Production copyright by Alex Scarrow.